There's a specific kind of betrayal scene that can either feel like delicious soap opera candy or like somebody just reached into your chest and squeezed. And Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau somehow does both at once. Because the show doesn't just want you to gasp and point at the screen like, no way she did that. It wants you to sit there afterward with that slightly sour taste in your mouth, the one you get when you realize you've been rooting for someone who never had a fair deal to begin with. And yeah, I'm telling you right now, I didn't expect to care this much. I went in thinking it would be a fast, guilty pleasure romance with a glow-up fantasy. What I got was a surprisingly lived-in little storm of class, pride, humiliation, and this weird, tender ache about being seen at the exact moment you feel most disposable. Welcome back to Flick Flair. If you like long, messy, feelings-forward drama talks where we don't pretend we are above the genre, hit subscribe. I'm keeping spoilers moderate here, meaning I'm absolutely going to talk about the setup and some major turning points. But I'm not going to get into anything that feels like a late game you only get to experience that once kind of reveal. I want you to still have runway if you haven't watched yet. So the premise, in its cleanest form, is basically this: Leo Pranatha is grinding. Like, real grinding. He's working as a laborer, doing the hard body, sweaty, thankless kind of work. And he's doing it for love. Specifically to support his girlfriend's college education. That already sets a certain emotional contract with the audience. Right? Because you're not just watching a guy hustle, you're watching a guy invest. Every shift is a deposit into a future he thinks they're building together. And the show is smart enough to let you feel the weight of that without turning Leo into a saint made of cardboard. He's not framed as perfect. He's framed as committed. There's a difference. And then we hit that graduation day. The day he's ready. He's got the proposal in his pocket, metaphorically or literally depending on how you picture it. But the energy is the same. This is the moment he thinks his sacrifice cashes out into something beautiful. Instead, he gets betrayed. And I know betrayed can mean a lot of things in Dramaland. But the important part is how the show stages the emotional geometry of it. It's public enough to scorch. It's personal enough to linger. It's not the kind of betrayal you can just swallow and pretend didn't happen, because it's happening on a day that's supposed to be a celebration of everything he's been funding with his own body. Here's where the drama does its first big swing, and honestly, this is where I lean forward. Geeta Gunwan, a woman CEO, witnesses the whole thing. And instead of doing the usual rich person watches poor person suffer and learns a lesson about humility, she gets interested. Not pity interested. Not charity interested. It reads as recognition. Like she sees something in him that the people in his life have been taking for granted. And in this almost surreal, high-voltage moment, she proposes a sudden marriage. Let's do it now kind of marriage. And Leo, still raw from the betrayal, steps into a different life like someone stepping out of the rain and into a room that's too bright at first. If that sounds like pure fantasy, it is. The show isn't shy about it. But it's also not as simple as poor guy gets rescued by rich woman, happy ending, roll credits. The fantasy is the hook. The interesting stuff is what happens after the hook. When the adrenaline fades and you realize a marriage is not a bandage, it's a whole environment. A new set of rules, new expectations, new dangers. And the show actually spends time on that, which is why I ended up loving it more than I expected to. Because the first emotional question the series plants isn't even, will Leo get revenge? It's, what does Leo do with being chosen? That sounds romantic, but it's also terrifying. When your entire identity has been built around proving your worth to someone who keeps moving the goalpost, being suddenly valued can feel like stepping onto ice. You don't trust it. You wait for the crack. And the actor playing Leo, whoever you want to credit for this performance, nails that tension in the eyes. There's this guardedness that doesn't read as sulky. It reads as someone recalibrating their entire understanding of what love is supposed to cost. And Geeta, as a character, could have been written as an unbeatable girl boss trophy wife fantasy in reverse. Rich woman sweeps in, fixes everything, end of story. But the show gives her an edge that's not just arrogance. She's decisive in a way that almost feels dangerous. Like she's used to making billion-dollar choices before lunch, and she's applying that same muscle to a human relationship. I don't say that as a diss. It's compelling. It makes her unpredictable. And it sets up a power dynamic that the drama can either handle with care or accidentally romanticize in a way that gets weird. The fact that Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau mostly avoids the worst pitfalls is, to me, one of its quiet achievements. Let me slow down and actually live inside that graduation betrayal for a second, because it's the emotional engine of everything after. In my head, the way the scene plays is not just about what happens, but what you hear, the muffled crowd noise, the slightly too bright celebratory atmosphere that suddenly becomes nauseating. Leo's breathing getting shallow, that tiny pause where you can tell his brain is trying to make reality for the plan he rehearsed 100 times. You can almost feel the texture of the moment, the smoothness of the diploma folder, the cheap ring box edges pressing into his palm, the sweat on the back of his neck because he's dressed up, but his body still remembers work. And then the betrayal hits and everything goes tinny. Like your ears are underwater. That's what humiliation does. It doesn't just hurt, it distorts. Now, the easiest way to watch a scene like that is to go, okay, now we hate the ex. Simple, clean. But the show's better when it lets that moment be about Leo, not about Villaney. It's not just that she wronged him. It's that his worldview collapses for a second. He's been told, directly or indirectly, that love is earned through sacrifice. He's been living that like scripture. And in one sharp turn, he's confronted with the possibility that sacrifice doesn't guarantee respect. That's a brutal lesson. And if you've ever been there, if you've ever been the person doing the most while someone else takes it as their baseline, this show pokes that bruise. And right on the bruise, here comes Geeta. Which is why that marriage proposal on site moment can either feel like a ridiculous leap or like a kind of emotional intervention. Here's my contrarian take, and I know some people are going to disagree with me. I actually don't think the instant marriage idea is automatically the show being irresponsible. I think it's the show externalizing an internal decision. Leo is at a crossroads. He can either spiral inward, start bargaining for his dignity back from the very people who just threw it away, or he can make a clean cut so sharp it shocks him back into agency. Geeta's offer is extreme, yes, but it's also a door. And sometimes, psychologically, a door that's too big to ignore is exactly what gets you moving again. But wait, because this matters later. The show doesn't let you forget that Geeta is also getting something out of this. That's the crucial part. If she were purely altruistic, the power imbalance would be unbearable. The series keeps hinting that her interest isn't charity. It's desire, yes, but also curiosity, maybe defiance, maybe loneliness. You can feel that she's making a choice that's half romance, half statement. And whenever a CEO character makes a statement using another person's life, that's when you start watching the edges of the frame for consequences. Visually, I was surprised by how grounded the early episodes feel, at least in texture. You can tell they want the contrast between Leo's world and Geeta's world to hit, but they don't do it in a cartoonish way. Leo's spaces feel busy, dense. The air feels warmer, like it has sweat and dust and street noise in it. The camera lingers on effort, hands, shoulders, the mundane repetition of labor. Then when Geeta enters, the show doesn't just slap on glossy lighting and call it a day. It tightens. It becomes more controlled, more negative space, more clean lines. You feel the difference as an emotional pressure, not just a lifestyle flex. And the sound design follows that too. Leo's world is louder in a way that's not always comforting. Machines, chatter, footsteps, that constant sense that you could be interrupted at any moment. In Geeta's world, the silence has weight. The kind of silence that tells you this room is expensive because nobody is allowed to be messy in it. I love when a drama uses sound like that because it's not showing off, it's storytelling. You're not just seeing class difference. You're hearing the way it shapes a person's nervous system. Now, performances. Leo's actor, again, not leaning on specific behind-the-scenes facts because I'm talking purely from what's on screen, has this really effective physical modesty early on. Even when he's standing straight, there's a slight inwardness, like his body learned to make itself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Then after the marriage twist, you start watching for tiny shifts. Does he take up space at the table? Does he meet someone's eyes longer than a second? Does he hesitate before speaking, like he's checking whether his voice is allowed here? That's the kind of acting I live for in these dramas. Not big speeches, micro survival habits. And Geeta's actor plays her with a sharpness that could have been one note, but she lets it crack. Not often, just enough. Sometimes it's in the way her smile lands a half-second late, like it's a practice tool. Sometimes it's in the way she looks at Leo like she's measuring him, then suddenly looks away like she's the one being measured. That's such a smart choice because it keeps the relationship from being purely she's the savior. It makes it feel like she's stepping into something risky too, even if the risk isn't financial. The romance itself is where I think Hidup keras, takdir berkilau finds its most addictive rhythm. It's not the slow burn, tea-sipping kind of romance. It's the we are in this now, and we're going to collide until we figure out the shape of us kind. A marriage that starts as a lightning strike means every domestic scene becomes charged. You can't even pour a glass of water without subtext. Who reaches first? Who assumes what? Who apologizes? Who refuses to? And the show is constantly playing with that. There's also a really interesting thing happening with masculinity here. Leo is not the typical rich male lead who teaches a poor girl how to live. It's inverted. But the show doesn't treat that inversion like a gimmick. It treats it like a stress test. Leo's pride is not villainized. It's humanized. Pride is what kept him moving when nobody else was cheering for him. So when he's suddenly placed in a world where his pride might read as ingratitude, you can feel the friction. And I appreciated that the writing doesn't always rush to punish him for it. Sometimes it lets him be stubborn. Sometimes it lets him be wrong without making him pathetic. If I'm being honest, this hit me personally in a way I didn't see coming. Not because I've married a CEO in a whirlwind moment. Tragically, the CEOs are not lining up at my door. But because the core wound is familiar. Being the reliable one. Being the one who gives and tells yourself, it'll be worth it when they finally see me. And then realizing the person you were trying to impress was never planning to see you, only to use your effort as background music to their life. Watching Leo get blindsided brought back that old, ugly feeling of heat in the face, that quiet shame that makes you want to laugh it off so you don't cry. So yeah, I was locked in. Against my will, a little bit. And has a small, self-aware side because I can't help myself. The instant marriage trope usually makes me roll my eyes so hard I see my own brain. Like, logistically, paperwork, witnesses, emotional processing, but the show sells it because it makes the moment feel like a dare. Not just to the characters, but to the audience. Are you going to judge this? Or are you going to follow the feeling? And I followed the feeling. I'm not proud. I'm just honest. But let's talk about the part that could have sunk the whole thing, the power imbalance. When one partner is extremely wealthy and the other is coming from a working-class survival grind, the romance can slide into something that feels like ownership if the writing isn't careful. The drama flirts with that line, and sometimes it makes you squirm on purpose. There are moments where you can feel Leo's discomfort at being displayed, or being managed, or being spoken for. And the show's best scenes, for me, are the ones where Geeta realizes she's about to treat him like a project, and stops, or doesn't stop, and then has to face what that reveals about her. Because Geeta, for all her charisma, is not framed as emotionally fluent. She's fluent in outcomes. She's fluent in decisions. She's fluent in control. Love is not control. Love is this messy, inconvenient, humiliating thing where you have to let someone affect you without immediately turning it into a strategy. And if there's one thematic thread the show keeps tugging, it's that both of them are learning new languages at the same time. Leo is learning the language of being valued without begging. Geeta is learning the language of valuing someone without buying. Now, what about the ex? I'm intentionally not getting too specific because the storyline you're walking into doesn't need every detail spoiled. But the show uses that betrayal as a recurring shadow, not just a one-and-done-villain origin. It pops up in social spaces, in family expectations, in the way people talk about Leo behind his back. That's realistic. Betrayal isn't a single event. It's a social ripple. And the drama understands that Leo can't just move on because other people keep dragging the past into the room like muddy shoes. This is where the editing rhythm starts to matter. The show will often cut from a moment of quiet between Leo and Geeta, something intimate, even if it's tense, to an external reminder of status and judgment. A look from someone across a room. A conversation that stops when Leo enters. The sudden formality of being introduced as the husband, like he's a title, not a person. Those cuts are doing emotional work. They keep you from relaxing too much. They keep reminding you that the relationship isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening in public, under scrutiny, inside systems. And I want to give the cinematography some credit for how it frames Leo after the marriage. Early on, he's often shot with clutter around him, the world crowding the frame. Later, when he's in Geeta's spaces, the camera sometimes leaves too much room around him, and it makes him look smaller, not bigger. That's such a quietly devastating choice, because you think wealth equals expansion. But emotionally, it can feel like exposure, like you're standing in a clean, expensive room with nothing to hide behind. No noise, no distractions, just you and your insecurities bouncing off marble. Here's another rehook for you. The show keeps asking this question without saying it out loud. If Leo's suffering was what made him worthy in everyone's eyes, what happens when he stops suffering? Who does he become when the struggle isn't his identity anymore? And do the people around him even allow that transformation? Or do they keep trying to pull him back into the role they understand? One of the smart-ass things Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau does is let sudden wealth feel psychologically complicated instead of purely cathartic. There's a version of this story where Leo puts on a suit, walks into the old neighborhood, and everyone claps. This show is more interested in the awkward middle. The part where your new life doesn't fit your old instincts. The part where you feel guilty for comfort. The part where you wonder if people are being nice to you or nice to what you're attached to now. And the actor playing Leo sells that with these tiny pauses before he accepts kindness, like he's waiting for the hidden fee. Geeta's arc, meanwhile, is not just learn to love. It's learn to listen. CEOs in dramas are often written like gods who just need the right person to melt them. But Geeta isn't ice. She's fire-contained. And fire-contained can be just as emotionally unavailable as ice. She's quick to act, quick to protect, quick to retaliate on Leo's behalf. And that's romantic in the moment. Until you realize she might be fighting battles Leo didn't ask her to fight in ways that remove his agency. The show plays with that tension. And it's juicy because you can be on her side and still feel uneasy. There are scenes, again, staying general, where you can tell the show is deliberately testing the idea of rescue. Like, is this love or is this a power fantasy? Is Geeta marrying him because she genuinely connects with him? Or because she's addicted to the feeling of choosing someone and watching the world react? And the writing doesn't answer that immediately. It lets it sit. It lets you watch her choices accumulate. That's the kind of patience I didn't expect from a drama with a title this dramatic. Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau is not pretending to be subtle, but it is often more careful than it looks. And can we talk about chemistry? Because this is where a lot of these shows live or die. Leo and Geeta's chemistry isn't just they look good together. It's friction chemistry. The kind where you can feel both of them holding back words. The kind where a simple exchange can feel like a negotiation and a flirtation at the same time. Their best moments, to me, are the ones that aren't explicitly romantic. The ones where they're forced to handle something practical together, and you see their values clash. That's where you learn who they are. Anybody can kiss. Not everybody can compromise without losing themselves. The music choices help sell that push-pull too. The show leans into emotional cues, sure, but it doesn't drown scenes in melodrama every time. Sometimes it lets silence to the heavy lifting, especially when Leo is processing something he can't name yet. And when the score does swell, it often feels tied to his internal shift rather than just the external romance. It's less, here's the love theme, and more, here's the moment he realizes his life has actually changed, and he doesn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. Now, if I have a critique, and I do, because I'm not here to pretend everything is perfect, it's that the setup is so strong and so clean that later conflicts have to work hard to feel earned. When you start with a betrayal that's sharp and a marriage that extreme, you've already cranked the volume. So the show sometimes risks chasing that high. It has to keep finding ways to escalate emotional stakes without turning everyone into a cartoon. And I think it mostly manages, but you can feel the pressure in certain stretches where misunderstandings threaten to become the engine instead of character choices. Still, the show is at its best when it grounds conflict in identity. Leo doesn't just react because the plot needs him to. He reacts because he has scars. Geeta doesn't just dominate because she's rich. She dominates because control is how she's survived her own world. That's what makes their clashes feel like more than noise. It's not just will they break up. It's can they build a relationship that doesn't reenact their worst coping mechanisms? And I'm telling you, there's a particular kind of scene the show keeps circling that I find fascinating. The moment right after public interaction, when the doors close and the performance drops. When you're out there being the CEO and her husband. And then suddenly you're just two people in a private space with all the awkwardness rushing in. Those moments are shot differently too. The camera often settles. The lighting softens. You can feel the show exhale. And in that exhale, you get the real emotional information. Here's a question that kept nagging at me as I watched. And it's part of why the drama stuck in my head. What does Leo actually want? Separate from what he's been told to want? Not a better life. Not respect. Not revenge. I mean, what does he want on a Tuesday night when nobody's watching? What makes him feel like himself? Because being someone's supportive boyfriend was an identity. Being someone's CEO husband is another identity. And the show keeps hinting that the real journey is him carving out a self that isn't defined by who he's attached to. And when the writing leans into that, it becomes more than a romance. It becomes this little story about self-worth that's messy and not always flattering. Leo makes choices that are frustrating sometimes, but they're frustrating in a human way, not in the writers needed drama way. You can see him testing boundaries. You can see him trying not to owe anyone anything ever again. And that's the paradox. The moment he's finally in a place where he could relax, his nervous system won't let him. Not yet. Geeta's side of it is equally compelling when the show lets her be wrong. I love a powerful woman character, obviously. But I love her more when she's allowed to misstep, to overreach, to confuse intensity for intimacy. There's a version of this story where Geeta is always correct and Leo is always the student. That would be boring. The moments where she's confronted with the fact that she can't solve him are the moments where the romance becomes real. And you know what surprised me? The show's sense of humor. It's not a sitcom. It's not winking at the camera. But there are these small beats, an awkward pause, a reaction shot, a moment where a character clearly wants to say something petty and decides, barely, not to, that relieve tension without undercutting it. That's hard to do. Because comedy in melodrama can feel like a tonal accident. Here it feels like a pressure valve. Like the show understands that people are ridiculous when they're stressed. We say dumb things. We misread each other. We trip over our pride. That's real. Now, I'm intentionally not going episode by episode because I don't want this to turn into a plot recital. What I want to talk about is the emotional architecture. The show starts with humiliation. Then it offers escape. Then it asks what escape costs. Then it begins to explore whether love can be chosen the way a contract can be chosen, or whether love demands something slower, something earned in the quiet. That's the arc I felt, at least in the way the early to mid stretch is shaped. And just when you think you know what kind of fantasy you're in, the drama starts pushing on the fantasy from the inside. It puts Leo in rooms where people smile like knives. It puts Geeta in situations where her authority doesn't protect her from emotional consequence. It starts asking whether the marriage is a shield or a spotlight. And I'm telling you, that shift is where the show either hooks you for real or loses you, depending on what you came for. Because if you came purely for the look at him win revenge glow up, you might get impatient when the show spends time on discomfort. But if you're like me, if you like when a drama lets the wish fulfillment have a hangover, you're going to eat this up. You're going to appreciate that the show doesn't treat emotional damage like something you can fix with a new wardrobe and a bank account. There's also something quietly subversive about making the CEO a woman in this setup. And the show doesn't always announce that, but it's there. The way people respond to Geeta's choices. The way her decisiveness is read as cold instead of strong. The way a powerful woman marrying a working class man becomes a social story in itself. The drama plays with that tension, and you can feel it in how secondary characters look at them, how gossip moves, how respect is granted or withheld. It's not just a love story, it's a social provocation. And every time the show leans into that, I found myself wanting it to go even further. Like, don't just use the CEO status as a backdrop for luxury shots. Use it as a lens for how people negotiate power in relationships. And the good news is, it does, more often than not. The show keeps returning to the idea that love is never just love when the world is watching. Love becomes a statement. Love becomes a threat. Love becomes leverage. The question is whether Leo and Geeta can keep it from becoming a weapon. One more rehook before I keep going, because this is the hinge of the whole series for me. Do you believe that Geeta's impulsive marriage offers romance? Or is it her own form of rebellion? And if it's rebellion, who pays the price when the rebellion stops being fun and starts being real? And if it is rebellion that changes the temperature of everything she does afterward, doesn't it? Because romance can be reckless and still be kind. Rebellion is reckless and usually wants an audience. The show never has Geeta sit down and give you a neat little monologue explaining her psychology, but it keeps slipping you these glimpses that feel like the real clue. The way she watches people watch her, the way she holds her posture like armor, the way she speaks in rooms where everyone's smiling, but you can tell the smiles have conditions. You start to sense that she's lived a life where her choices were never fully hers, even when she's technically the most powerful person in the building. There's this particular vibe around her that I can only describe as woman who has won too many battles and doesn't know what peace looks like. It's not sadness exactly, it's vigilance. And when she sees Leo get humiliated in public, it's like something in her recognizes that kind of social cruelty instantly. Maybe she's been on the receiving end in different packaging. Maybe she's been the one forced to stay composed while people judged her worth like it was a stock price. So when she reaches for him, it doesn't read like she's saving a stray kitten. It reads like she's making a move against the whole idea of people being treated as disposable. But then the show complicates it, because Geeta's version of making a move is always extreme. She doesn't offer him a ride home and a pep talk. She offers him a marriage that detonates his entire social reality. That's not a gentle gesture. That's an earthquake. And it's romantic as a fantasy, sure, but it's also a lot to do to someone who's in shock. The drama doesn't fully interrogate the consent logistics in a modern, clinical way, and I'm not going to pretend it does. What it does do, though, is let Leo's confusion exist. It lets him hesitate. It lets him feel the vertigo of stepping into something he can't fully understand yet. There's a moment early in their dynamic. Again, I'm staying general, because moderate spoilers, where Leo's face is basically screaming, "I don't know how to behave in this world," while his mouth is trying to be polite. And it's almost funny, but in a painful way. Like watching someone wearing shoes that don't fit and pretending they're fine. That's the emotional comedy of class mobility, right? The etiquette rules are invisible until you break them. And suddenly everyone's staring like you committed a crime by not knowing the dance. And the show loves putting Leo in that position. Not to mock him, to stress him. Because stress reveals character. It's not just the rich spaces, either. It's the conversations. The kind of small talk that is actually a test. People asking questions that sound friendly, but are designed to measure you. Where did you go to school? What do you do? How did you meet? And you can feel Leo's stomach tighten every time, because his honest answers don't sound impressive in their language. In his language, "I worked construction to pay for my girlfriend's tuition" is a love story. In their language, it's a resume gap. Here's where the writing earns points from me. It doesn't magically turn Leo into a slick, suave, new man overnight. He doesn't suddenly become witty and fearless. He gets quieter in some spaces. He stiffens. Sometimes he overcompensates. Sometimes he withdraws. Those are real coping strategies. And the show trusts the audience enough to let that be the drama instead of immediately giving him a montage where he learns folk placement and confidence. Now, because the hook is so bold, the show has to build its middle on smaller, more intimate tensions. And that's where I think Hidup keras, takdir berkilau quietly shines. The story starts loud, but the relationship is built in these tiny domestic fractures. The way Leo reacts when someone calls him lucky. The way Geeta reacts when someone implies she's impulsive or emotional. The way both of them flinch at the idea of being pitied. It's like they're allergic to the same thing for different reasons. There's a scene where the drama keeps returning to that I found strangely tender. Leo being alone in a beautiful space. Not doing anything dramatic. Just existing. You can feel how the show frames luxury as unfamiliar, almost invasive. Like the softness of the couch is not comforting yet because it feels like it belongs to someone else's life. The camera will sit on him for an extra beat, letting you watch him not know where to put his hands. And that is such a specific, human discomfort that a lot of drama skip because they're eager to show you the glow up. This one lingers in the awkwardness. It's not glamorous. It's true. And then there's Geeta's side, which is, honestly, a different kind of loneliness. Because she is surrounded by people all the time. But the show makes it clear that most of those people are there because of her position, not because of her. She walks through spaces where everyone knows her name, and it still feels like nobody knows her. That's a classic trope, sure, but it's executed with enough specificity here that it doesn't feel like a copy-paste rich girl sadness. It feels like a life where vulnerability is a liability. So when she does something impulsive like marrying Leo, it reads like someone finally doing something that isn't optimized. But wait, because the series doesn't let that romantic interpretation stay pure. It keeps introducing the idea that in Geeta's world, nothing is ever just personal. Everything has optics. Everything has ripple effects. People talk. Investors talk. Family talks. And suddenly Leo isn't just a husband. He's a headline waiting to happen. The marriage becomes a storyline in itself. And if you've ever been the person who gets pulled into someone else's reputation management, you know how suffocating that can be. The corporate atmosphere, when the show leans into it, has this cold, glassy edge that I really appreciated. Not because it's wildly innovative, but because it's consistent. Meetings feel like theater. Everyone's measured. The pauses are too long. The compliments are too careful. and Geeta navigates that space like she was built in it, which makes it easy to forget she might be just as trapped by it as anyone else. The drama uses boardroom-style scenes not as plot machinery, again, staying safe with specifics, but as mood. As a reminder that Geeta's love life is happening under Flossin's scrutiny. Leo, on the other hand, comes from a world where work is physical and immediate. You lift, you carry, you sweat, you go home tired. The consequences are tangible. In Geeta's world, consequences are delayed and abstract. A sentence can cost someone their job 6 months later. A rumor can tank trust. A decision can ricochet through 10 people who never even met the person affected. So part of the tension is not just wealth difference. It's a difference in how reality works. And watching Leo try to translate himself into that is, weirdly, one of the most compelling parts. There's also this ongoing question of dignity. When Leo was a laborer, he had dignity in effort, even if society didn't applaud it. When he becomes the CEO's husband, society suddenly grants him prestige. But it can be a fake dignity, like borrowed clothing. And the show keeps poking that nerve. Leo doesn't want to be respected because he married well. He wants to be respected because he's him. That's the core. And whenever a character, any character, treats him like a symbol instead of a person, you can see his jaw tighten. You know what's wild? Sometimes the drama almost makes you miss the simplicity of his old life. Not because it was better, obviously, but because it was honest. Hard, but honest. There's this deep psychological fatigue that comes from constantly being evaluated in a new environment. And the show captures that with pacing. It will give you sequences that feel almost breathless, social obligations, introductions, conversations, eyes on him. Then it will cut to a quieter moment where Leo finally exhales. And you realize you've been holding your breath too. Another thing I really want to talk about is how the show treats the betrayal not just as an inciting incident, but as a wound that affects how Leo receives love. Because he doesn't immediately trust Geeta's interest. And he shouldn't. Trust is not a switch you flip, because the new person is rich and pretty and decisive. The show lets Leo's suspicion exist without turning him into a paranoid jerk. He's cautious in a way that feels earned. Sometimes he tests her. Sometimes he withdraws. Sometimes he wants to believe her so badly, you can almost see him fighting with himself. And Geeta's reaction to that is where the romance gets interesting. Because she's not used to being doubted. She's used to being obeyed or opposed, but not doubted in that soft, wounded way. When someone doubts you because they're scared you'll hurt them, it's not a challenge you can win by being louder. You have to be consistent. You have to be patient. You have to show up. And patience is not her strongest muscle at first. So watching her learn it, stumble into it, resent it, then slowly embody it is a genuinely satisfying arc. I also need to shout out the way the show uses wardrobe and styling as character storytelling rather than just glow up on. Leo's clothes don't instantly become high fashion the second he's in her world. There's often a slight mismatch, a feeling that he's wearing what he thinks he's supposed to wear. And that matters, because it shows he's still performing an idea of acceptable rather than inhabiting it. Meanwhile, Geeta's look is consistent in a way that feels like brand management. Even in private moments, she's composed. And when the show lets that composition slip, hair slightly undone, shoulders dropping, voice softer, it lands like a confession without words. Here's a small thing that got me: the blocking. The way the two of them are positioned in rooms. Early on, Geeta tends to stand while Leo sits, or she moves first and he follows. Not always, but enough that you feel the dynamic. Then, as they start to actually negotiate partnership, you see more moments where they're side by side, moving together, sharing space. This is the kind of craft detail most people don't consciously clock, but your body feels it. It's visual storytelling. It's power shifting in inches. And then the show does something I didn't expect. It lets Geeta be awkward. Not socially awkward, like she doesn't know how to talk. Emotionally awkward, like she knows exactly how to close a deal but doesn't know how to ask someone if they're okay without it sounding like a performance review. That's where her character becomes human to me. Because a lot of CEO characters are written like they're emotionally omniscient. Here, she's emotionally clumsy in specific ways. She reaches for control when she's scared. She reaches for intensity when she's insecure. She reaches for gestures when she doesn't know how to say the thing. And sometimes those gestures are huge. Too huge. Which brings us back to the rebellion question. If she's used to being strategic, then a sudden marriage is either the most romantic thing she's ever done or the most strategic thing she's ever done in disguise. And the show keeps letting both possibilities live in the same room. That ambiguity is part of the tension. You want to trust her because she's magnetic and she's protecting Leo in a way that feels deeply satisfying after what happened to him. But you also want to ask, gently, protecting him from what exactly? And at what cost to his autonomy? This is where my loved but not blind stance comes in. I adore the emotional electricity of their pairing. I adore the way the show frames Leo's worth as intrinsic. But there are moments where I wish the script slowed down and let Leo articulate more of his boundaries out loud. Not because I need therapy dialogue, just because sometimes the show leans on the fantasy of Geeta knowing what he needs, and that can slide into mind-reading romance. In real life, mind reading is just miscommunication with better lighting. The drama is mostly careful, but it does flirt with that trope. The ex-girlfriend, in the background of all this, functions like a social mirror. The show doesn't need to constantly bring her on screen to keep her relevant. Her betrayal is like a stain that other characters keep pointing at. And what's interesting is how different people interpret it. Some use it to pity Leo. Some use it to shame him, as if being betrayed is evidence of weakness. Some use it to gossip about Geeta, like her marriage choice must mean something is wrong with her. And you start seeing how society loves to assign moral meaning to other people's pain. That's one of the more quietly sharp themes here. There's a mid-story shift. Again, not a late twist, just a natural escalation, where the relationship stops being about the initial shock and starts being about daily survival in each other's worlds. That's where you find out if a drama actually has something to say, or if it was just riding the premise. And Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau, for me, has enough emotional infrastructure to make that shift work. It starts asking different questions. Not will he get over the betrayal, but what does healing look like when your life changes faster than your heart can catch up? It also starts exploring how love can be both refuge and battlefield. Leo and Geeta are attracted to each other, sure, but they're also using each other in small ways at first. Not maliciously, humanly. Leo uses Geeta's world as a shield from humiliation. Geeta uses Leo's straightforwardness as a kind of moral anchor, a way to feel real in a life that's constantly curated. And that's not a condemnation. That's just how people are. We come into relationships with needs we don't always admit. The drama is honest about that, and it makes their eventual moments of genuine care feel earned. Here's another rehook, because this is the moment where the show's emotional stakes start to depend. When the fantasy phase ends, what do they actually owe each other? Does Leo owe Geeta gratitude forever because she changed his life? Does Geeta owe Leo softness because she pulled him into her world? Or do they both owe each other something harder, respect that doesn't depend on what they provide? One of my favorite things in this drama is the way it treats respect as romantic. Not in a preachy way, in a visceral way. There are scenes where the sexiest thing isn't a kiss, it's Geeta backing off. It's Leo speaking up. It's one of them choosing to ask instead of assume. And I know that sounds like I'm turning this into a relationship TED talk, but I swear, the show makes it cinematic. It makes it tense. It makes it feel like a high-stakes duel, except the weapons are pride and vulnerability. And because we're talking craft, I want to point out how the show uses close-ups. It's not afraid of faces. It will hold on Leo's expression while someone else talks about him like he isn't there. And you watch his eyes flicker, that micro swallow, that controlled breath. It will hold on Geeta when she's hearing something she doesn't like, and you see the calculation start, but then you see her choose, sometimes, to not strike. Those are performance moments, but they're also directorial choices. The camera trusts the actors, and that trust pays off. There's a mini scene I have to talk through because it's one of those moments where the drama's emotional logic really clicked for me. Picture a big, pristine interior space. Cool lighting, everything straight, everything expensive. Leo is standing there, a little too still, like he's afraid to disturb the air. Someone says something that lands wrong. Maybe not even cruel, just dismissive in that casual way privileged people can be dismissive without noticing. You watch Leo's shoulders tighten, like his body is bracing for impact. And then Geeta steps in, and the room shifts. Not because she shouts, because she chooses her words like blades and keeps her tone calm. And the sound in that moment feels like it drops out around them. You hear the click of a heel, the soft rustle of fabric, the slight echo of her voice against hard surfaces. Leo looks at her with this mix of gratitude and discomfort, because being defended feels good, but being defended like that also confirms you needed defense. It's a complicated relief. It's relief with a bruise underneath. And that bruise is where the drama keeps finding new conflict. Leo doesn't want to be anyone's charity case. He doesn't want to be anyone's accessory. He wants to stand on his own. But standing on your own when you've been yanked into a higher social stratosphere is tricky, because everything you do becomes symbolic. If he asserts himself, people call him ungrateful. If he stays quiet, people call him weak. If he succeeds, people credit Geeta. If he fails, people blame him. The show understands that trap. It's not subtle about it, but it doesn't need to be. The trap is the point. Geeta, meanwhile, has her own trap. If she's too soft, people will eat her alive. If she's too hard, people will call her a monster. If she loves openly, she looks unprofessional. If she keeps it private, she looks cold. The drama knows that powerful women don't get to be human without paying a tax. And watching her navigate that tax while trying to build something real with Leo is, honestly, the heart of the show for me. There's also a theme humming underneath everything: transactional love versus chosen love. Leo's previous relationship, from what we are given, is shaped by transaction even if he didn't want to see it. His labor becomes a currency. Her affection becomes a reward he thinks he can earn. And then Geeta comes in with a literal contract-like gesture: marriage. Transaction on paper. But what happens is the opposite of what you'd expect. The transactional setup forces both of them to confront what can't be bought: trust, safety, respect. And the drama keeps returning to that tension like it's a chord progression. Now, let me give you another contrarian take. Because I know the internet loves to flatten characters into green flag and red flag like we're all judges at the relationship Olympics. I don't actually think Geeta's intensity is the problem people might say it is. I think the real danger is not her intensity, it's her certainty. Intensity can be passion. Certainty can be entitlement. When she's intense but still curious about Leo, still willing to be surprised by him, that's when she's most lovable. When she's certain about him, certain she knows what's best, certain she's right, that's when the power imbalance starts to feel sharp. And the drama, to its credit, seems to understand that distinction. There are times when the show almost dares you to dislike her. Not in a cheap way, but in a, she is not a fantasy girlfriend, she's a person with habits way. She can be controlling, she can be impatient. She can throw her weight around to fix a situation without asking Leo if he wants it fixed that way. And the reason that works is because the show doesn't treat those behaviors as sexy by default. Sometimes it treats them as a flaw that causes emotional fallout, which is what keeps me invested. I don't want perfect. I want consequence. On the flip side, Leo is not always the helpless cinnamon roll some viewers might want him to be. He can be prideful to the point of self-sabotage. He can shut down instead of communicating. He can make choices that feel like he's punishing himself because he doesn't know how to accept happiness without paying for it. And if you've never been in that headspace, it can be frustrating to watch. But if you have, it's painfully familiar. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is letting yourself have something good without immediately looking for the catch. The series also plays with the idea of public perception as a kind of villain. Not a single mustache-twirling antagonist, but the collective gaze. The way strangers feel entitled to interpret your relationship. The way people project narratives onto you. The way your story becomes a cautionary tale or a gossip snack. And because Geeta is high profile, that gaze is constant. Leo becomes visible in a way he never was before, and visibility is not the same as being seen. Visibility can be violence, honestly, being looked at without being understood. There are a particular kind of scene, recurring in different forms, where Leo is in a room full of polished people. And you can tell he feels like he's still wearing dust from his old life that they can smell. The show conveys that not by having people literally sniff him, thank God, but through tiny social cues. Slight pauses, eyes flicking over his clothes, questions that feel like traps. The way laughter lands a little too loud after he says something sincere. It's social cruelty dressed as manners. And the drama's camera often stays on Leo's face in these moments, which forces you to sit with his discomfort instead of escaping into the spectacle. And then, because this is a romance drama, it gives you relief. It gives you scenes where Geeta and Leo are alone and the masks drop. But even those scenes are complicated. Sometimes Geeta's tenderness feels like a room Leo can finally breathe in. Sometimes it feels like another room he has to earn access to. And the show is honest about how inconsistent that can be early on. Love isn't a linear upgrade. It's a negotiation. Sometimes you regress. Sometimes you lash out. Sometimes you apologize badly. Sometimes you learn. One thing I appreciate is that the show doesn't make Leo's new life erase his connection to his old world. It keeps the memory of labor present. And that's important thematically. Because a lot of Cinderella-style stories accidentally imply that the goal is to escape your class and never look back. This drama, at least in the way it frames Leo emotionally, suggests something different. The goal is not to be ashamed of where you came from. The goal is to stop being punished for it. And there's a big difference there. The visual language supports that too. When the show returns to more grounded, working-class spaces, it doesn't shoot them like misery porn. It shoots them with warmth, texture, movement. You feel community. You feel life. Meanwhile, the rich spaces can feel sterile. Beautiful, yes, but sterile. And that's a smart inversion of expectations. It quietly argues that wealth is not inherently soulful. It's just clean. And if you've ever been in a place that's so pristine you're afraid to touch anything, you know exactly what I mean. Now, pacing-wise, because I'm loved on this drama, but I'm still going to be real with you. There are stretches where the show leans a little too hard on tension loops. You know those sequences where you can feel the writers going, okay, we need another obstacle. And the obstacle is not always the most organic. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding that could have been solved with a 2-minute conversation. Sometimes it's a social complication that exists mostly to keep the pressure on. It doesn't ruin the show for me, but you can feel it. And if you're someone who gets impatient with avoidable conflict, you might be muttering at your screen a bit. That said, I also think some viewers mislabel those moments as bad writing when they're actually character stubbornness. There's a difference. Leo and Geeta both have reasons they don't communicate perfectly. Leo is afraid of being needy. Geeta is afraid of being vulnerable. Those fears create silence. Silence creates misinterpretation. Misinterpretation creates drama. Is it convenient? Sure, but it's also psychologically consistent. And that's why I'm not as harsh on it as I might be on a different show. The show's emotional peaks are often built not on plot twists, but on confrontation scenes where someone finally says the thing they've been swallowing. And the dialogue in those scenes can be surprisingly sharp. Not poetry, not quotable one-liners. More like raw honesty that lands because it's timed right. The actors know how to let a line hang in the air. They don't rush to the next beat. They let the silence after a sentence do damage. That's craft. And speaking of silence, the sound mix sometimes uses quiet as a weapon. There are moments where the background noise drops out and you're left with just breathing and fabric movement and a single held note in the score. It pulls you closer. It makes the scene feel intimate, almost invasive, like you're eavesdropping on something private. That's when the drama feels most cinematic to me. Not when it's showing you luxury cars. When it's making you feel the weight of a look. The relationship itself goes through this interesting evolution where the initial marriage as shock gradually becomes marriage as mirror. They start reflecting each other's wounds back at each other. Leo sees how lonely power can be. Geeta sees how humiliating dependence can be. And they both start noticing the ways they've been performing strength. Leo's strength is endurance. Geeta's strength is control. Endurance can become martyrdom. Control can become isolation. The drama is basically watching them unlearn the toxic versions of their strengths. That's a great theme for a romance, honestly. Here's something else that impressed me. The show doesn't treat class difference as purely external. It treats it as internalized. Leo carries internalized scarcity. Even when he's safe, he's scanning for danger. Geeta carries internalized suspicion. Even when someone loves her, she's scanning for motive. And those internalized habits show up in tiny ways. Leo hesitating before asking for something. Geeta hesitating before giving without conditions. The drama builds intimacy out of those little fractures slowly healing. There's also a subtle thread about education versus intelligence. Leo didn't get the formal opportunities his ex did, but the show makes it clear he's not lesser. He's emotionally perceptive in ways the educated people around him aren't. He reads sincerity. He reads disrespect. He understands labor and loyalty in his bones. And I love that the show refuses to equate degrees with worth. It doesn't romanticize ignorance either. It just refuses to play that snobby game. And then there's this idea of what counts as success. In Leo's old relationship, success was her graduation, her future, her upward mobility. Leo was the scaffolding. In his new relationship, success is less clear. Is it him integrating into her world? Is it him building his own path? Is it them becoming a partnership? The show keeps shifting the target, which can feel messy, but it also feels like life. The moment you accomplish one dream, you're confronted with the fact that your needs changed while you weren't looking. Another rehook, because this is where the show starts to sneak up on you emotionally. What happens when Leo stops seeing himself as someone who has to earn love? And maybe even scarier, what happens when Geeta starts believing she's lovable without being impressive? Because if those two shifts happen, the entire power dynamic rewires. A thing I didn't expect to care about, but I did, is the way the series plays with home. Leo's idea of home is tied to effort, community, familiarity. Geeta's idea of home is tied to security, privacy, control. When they share space, the question becomes, whose definition wins? And the best domestic scenes aren't about decorating. They're about comfort. Who feels comfortable first? Who is always adapting? Who gets to have bad days? Who gets to be messy? There's a sequence vibe where Leo tries to do something kind for Geeta in the way he knows how, practical, grounded, maybe a little old-fashioned. And you can see Geeta's brain almost short-circuit. Because she's used to grand gestures as status displays. She's not used to being cared for in a way that doesn't come with publicity. And that's when you see her soften. Not because she's being won over. Because she's being met in a place she didn't know she had. The show also knows how to make jealousy feel specific rather than generic. It's not just who is the rival. It's what does the rival represent. For Leo, any hint that Geeta has a world he can't access triggers his insecurity about being replaceable. For Geeta, any hint that Leo's heart still aches for the past triggers her insecurity about being used as a rebound or a statement. Their jealousy isn't cute. It's revealing. It points straight at the wound. And I appreciate that the drama doesn't always resolve those insecurities immediately. It lets them resurface in new forms. That's realistic. You don't heal once. You heal in layers. You think you're fine, and then a comment hits wrong, and suddenly you're back in your old skin. The show captures that with repetition that feels intentional rather than lazy. The same issue shows up, but the characters respond slightly differently each time. That's growth. Now, let's talk about the title for a second, because Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau is so on the nose it could have been embarrassing. Hard life, sparkling fate. It's basically promising you struggle and glow up in the same breath. But what I like is that the sparkle isn't just wealth. The sparkle is possibility. It's the idea that your fate can change, yes, but also that your self-perception can change. And the show keeps returning to that. Leo's fate sparkles not because he's rich now, but because he's finally being given options. And options are freedom. Sometimes overwhelming freedom, but still. The editing also does this thing where it will cross-cut between worlds in a way that underlines the emotional irony. Like Leo being in a luxury setting while flashing back emotionally, not literally, just in demeanor to his old grind. Or Geeta being in a room full of power players while acting in private moments with Leo like someone who has no power over her own feelings. Those juxtapositions are the show's bread and butter. They keep you aware that status is not the same as stability. There are minor critique I have about how the show occasionally telegraphs emotional beats with music. Sometimes it trusts the actors and the silence, and it's gorgeous. Other times it layers on a slightly too obvious swell, like it's afraid you won't feel the emotion unless it tells you to. And it's like, no, I'm here. I'm feeling it. You don't have to spoon-feed me tears. But that's a small complaint in the grand scheme, and honestly, it's part of the genre. Melodrama likes to underline. The thing that keeps me hooked is that the show never fully lets Leo become passive. Even when he's overwhelmed, he's making choices. Sometimes messy choices. Sometimes stubborn choices. But choices. And that matters because in these kinds of stories, the rescued character can easily turn into an object the plot moves around. Here, Leo remains a subject. He pushes back. He surprises Geeta. He asserts himself in ways that are not always convenient for romance, but are necessary for dignity. And Geeta, crucially, is not punished for being powerful. The show doesn't do that annoying thing where it has to humble her into a softer, less competent version of herself to make her lovable. She stays sharp. She stays capable. The growth is not in her becoming weaker. It's in her becoming more emotionally honest. That's a big difference. I love seeing a drama let a woman keep her teeth and still be tender. There's a real tenderness, too, in how the show frames Leo's emotional labor. Men in dramas often get to be angry and then be forgiven because they're hot. Here, Leo's emotional journey is treated with respect. He's allowed to be hurt. He's allowed to be confused. He's allowed to not have the right words. And the show doesn't mock that. It doesn't rush him. That's meaningful. Especially in a genre space where male vulnerability can be either fetishized or ridiculed. And if you're a newcomer to this kind of Indonesian drama setup, you might be wondering, okay, is this just a fantasy for people who want to see a bad ex-get karma? And yes, that's in the DNA. The betrayal is designed to make you hungry for justice. But the reason I'm still talking about this show like it has substance is because it uses that hunger as a starting point, not the whole meal. It's less interested in humiliating the ex forever and more interested in what Leo does after humiliation. That's a more mature emotional question. At the same time, the show is not above giving you catharsis. It knows what genre it's in. It will give you moments where you feel that satisfying click of the universe correcting itself a little. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't enjoy those moments. I did. I'm human. I like seeing someone who treated a good person like trash realize they miscalculated. But the best catharsis is when it's tied to growth, not just punishment. And when the show does that, when Leo's win is him valuing himself rather than someone else losing, that's when it lands hardest. One more thing about Geeta's portrayal. I like that the drama doesn't make her maternal toward Leo. That's a trap these stories can fall into, especially when one partner has more resources. The dynamic can turn into caretaker and dependent, which is not sexy and not healthy. Here, Geeta can be protective, yes, but the show often frames it as partnership tension, not mothering. When it slips toward control, it's uncomfortable, and the discomfort feels intentional. It's the show warning you, this is not automatically cute. And you know what else? The show sometimes lets Leo be the emotionally steadier one. Not always, but often enough to matter. Geeta is the one with the external power, but Leo can be the one with the internal compass. He can call out hypocrisy. He can name what's real. He can refuse to play the social games. That's a form of power too. And the drama respects that. It doesn't treat emotional intelligence as lesser than money. There are also secondary dynamics, friends, colleagues, family figures that function less like fully fleshed side plots and more like pressure points. They exist to poke at Leo and Geeta's insecurities. Some are supportive in complicated ways. Some are openly judgmental. The show uses them like weather. You feel the relationship trying to hold steady while the environment keeps changing. And that's why it stays engaging even when the plot slows down. Because the emotional pressure never fully disappears. I'll say this, too. The show's CEO world is not trying to be a documentary. It's stylized. It's melodrama. So if you're someone who watches corporate storylines and needs realistic business mechanics, you might roll your eyes. But that's not what the show is aiming for. The corporate setting is a metaphor machine. It's a stage for power, loyalty, betrayal, image. It's not about quarterly earnings. It's about who gets to speak and who gets silenced. And when you accept that, you can enjoy the way the drama turns boardroom energy into emotional energy. The same tactics people use in business, negotiation, leverage, strategic silence, bleed into Geeta's relationships. She's used to winning. She's used to moving pieces. And love doesn't let you move pieces without moving yourself. That's the friction. That's the romance. Here's a quieter moment that stuck with me. And it's not even big. Leo is alone, processing something. And you can see him trying to talk himself into believing he deserves the life he's in. There's a look people get when they're trying to accept good news, but their trauma keeps whispering, don't get comfortable. The show captures that look. It's not tears. It's not melodramatic sobbing. It's that slightly distant gaze, like your mind is halfway out the door preparing for loss. And I felt that. I felt it in my chest. Because I've been that person who gets something good and immediately starts bracing for the cost. And then, because the drama is not content to just be psychological, it brings the outside world back in. It keeps reminding you that Leo's shift in status changes how everyone treats him, including people who used to ignore him. That can be satisfying, watching respect suddenly appear. But it's also sickening if you think about it too long, because it means the respect was never about his character. It was about proximity to power. And the show lets that bitterness sit under the romance like a bass note. Another rehook, because this is where the show really starts to test your allegiance. When people finally start treating Leo well, can he accept it without it corrupting him? And when people start criticizing Geeta's marriage choice, can she hold her ground without turning Leo into a pawn in her pride war? Those are the moments that decide whether this is a real love story or just a spectacle. I've seen some viewers of dramas like this complain when the male lead doesn't immediately become boss in his new environment, like they want him to flip a switch and dominate everyone. But I actually love that Leo doesn't do that. Because domination is not the only form of strength. Sometimes strength is staying kind when you finally have the power to be cruel. Sometimes strength is refusing to become the thing that hurt you. And I think the drama is aiming for that. It wants Leo's growth to be about wholeness, not just status. And for Geeta, the growth is about letting someone in without immediately turning intimacy into a possession. There's a fine line between I choose you and you're mine. The show dances on that line a lot. When it's done well, it's intoxicating. When it's done poorly, it can feel controlling. The good news is the drama usually knows when it's stepping into uncomfortable territory, and it uses that discomfort to generate conflict rather than glossing over it. I also want to talk about how the show handles emotional payoff. It doesn't always go for the biggest, loudest payoff. Sometimes it goes for the quiet one. A small apology, a small change in behavior, a small moment of trust. And those payoffs can be more satisfying than a big dramatic gesture because they feel like actual relationship building. A drama that understands that is already ahead of a lot of its peers. And yes, there are still big moments. It wouldn't be this genre if there weren't. There are confrontations, there are public moments, there are high-stakes social situations where the relationship is tested. But what I like is that the show tries to connect those big moments back to the characters' internal journeys. It's not just spectacle for spectacle's sake. It's spectacle as a pressure cooker. Now, I know some people will watch this and say, it's unrealistic that a CEO would just marry a guy she met during his breakup. And yeah, obviously. But realism isn't the point. Emotional truth is the point. And emotionally, the story is saying, what if the moment you were discarded became the moment you were chosen? That's not a literal proposition. It's a healing fantasy. And those fantasies exist for a reason. People need them. People need stories that tell them their worst day could still be the doorway to something better. But the show earns that fantasy by not pretending it fixes everything. Leo's betrayal doesn't disappear. His insecurity doesn't disappear. Geeta's world doesn't suddenly become welcoming. Their marriage doesn't automatically become stable. The fantasy is not that everything becomes easy. The fantasy is that someone decides you're worth fighting for even when you feel worthless. And then the show makes you watch what it takes to live up to that decision. There's a line the drama keeps circling without saying it. Being loved is not the same as feeling lovable. Leo is loved by Geeta, at least in her way. But feeling lovable is a different journey. And the series spends time on that. It lets Leo's self-worth lag behind his circumstances. That's realistic. That's also where a lot of the tension comes from. Because he'll interpret neutral things as rejection. He'll hear criticism where there is none. He'll brace for abandonment. And Geeta, who is not always the most emotionally patient person, has to decide whether she can handle loving someone whose wound keeps flinching. And then there's the way the show handles intimacy. It's not just physical intimacy. It's emotional intimacy, which is harder. There are moments where the two of them are close, but not connected. Where they're sharing space, but not sharing truth. The camera often emphasizes that by framing them in the same shot, but separated by furniture, by a doorway, by lighting. It's visual metaphor, but it's also just good blocking. It makes you feel the distance. When the show finally lets them connect, really connect, it's not always through grand declarations. Sometimes it's through mundane honesty. I don't know how to do this. I'm scared. I don't want to lose you. Those lines can sound cheesy on paper, but if the performance is grounded, it lands like a gut punch. And here, the performances are grounded enough that I bought it. I will say, though, that if you're someone who prefers romance where the couple is gentle and soft from the start, this might not be your flavor. This is not a calm love story. It's a love story with teeth. The affection is real, but it's braided with pride and fear and class tension. They hurt each other sometimes without meaning to. They misread each other. They push buttons. And if that kind of friction stresses you out, you may find yourself pausing episodes like, I need a break. I did that once. Not because it was bad, because it was intense. And one last craft note before I keep rolling. The show's color palette shifts subtly depending on whose emotional perspective you're leaning into. When Leo is overwhelmed, the world can feel colder, more sterile, even if he's in a warm-toned room. When he feels grounded, the textures come back. When Geeta is in control, the frames feel symmetrical, composed. When she's emotionally off balance, the camera feels a little looser, a little closer, like it's catching her before she can fix her face. Those choices aren't screaming at you, but they shape your experience. There's still so much to unpack in how the drama handles the later relationship tests, the way outside forces keep interfering, and the way both characters' definitions of love evolve as the story stretches on, especially as the initial shock of the marriage wears off and the real work begins, because that's the part a lot of these stories skip, right? The premise gets you in the door, the wedding gets you screaming, the makeover gets you clapping, and then it's like the show thinks it can just coast on the fantasy fumes. Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau doesn't coast. It makes the marriage feel like an ongoing event, not a single dramatic choice. It's paperwork and perception, it's routines and resentments. It's the kind of intimacy that isn't candlelight but logistics. And the further you go, the more you realize the real antagonist isn't even a person. It's the invisible contract both of them were raised to sign. Leo's contract says love must be earned, Geeta's contract says love must be controlled. The tone shifts, too, in a way I didn't expect. Early on, it's all forward momentum, like a car that just merged onto a highway. Later, the show slows down and starts taking side streets. Conversations get longer. Silences get heavier. You can feel the writers going, okay, we got you with the hook. Now we're going to make you sit with the aftertaste. And I'm not saying every viewer is going to love that. Some people are going to be like, please, get back to the juicy stuff. But for me, the juicy stuff becomes the quiet stuff. The way Leo hesitates before calling Geeta by her name in certain rooms. The way Geeta's voice changes when she's speaking as CEO versus when she's speaking as wife. That's the kind of texture you only get when a show is willing to live inside its own setup. One of the most compelling tensions that emerges as the story keeps going is Leo's relationship with gratitude. Because gratitude is supposed to be a warm feeling, right? A good feeling. But when there's a power imbalance, gratitude can turn into a leash. People start expecting it from you. They start using it to shut you up. And you can tell Leo is fighting that on a cellular level. He wants to appreciate Geeta. He does appreciate her. But he doesn't want appreciation to become his entire personality. He doesn't want to be the guy whose role is to say thank you and stay quiet. And Geeta, being who she is both the best and worst person to navigate that with. Because she does these big, decisive things that genuinely help him. But she also sometimes moves so fast she forgets he's a human being with pride, not a problem to solve. There's a specific kind of scene the show likes to build where Leo is clearly uncomfortable with the way she's handling something for him. And Geeta is clearly confused because in her mind, handling it is love. It's protection. It's loyalty. And then Leo has to do the terrifying thing. Tell someone who's doing something for you that it doesn't feel good. That is such a real adult relationship problem. And it's so rarely dramatized without making one side cartoonishly wrong. The series keeps circling this idea of agency like it's sacred. Who gets to choose? Who gets to speak? Who gets to define the story? Leo's old relationship stripped him of agency in a slow, polite way. He was always choosing, but his choices were always in service of someone else's future. Now, in Geeta's world, his agency is threatened in a different way. It's not that he's invisible. It's that he's hypervisible and constantly interpreted. And whenever he tries to reclaim his own narrative, the world pushes back like, no, you're the husband. Stay in your lane. Here's the thing that made me lean in even harder. The show lets Leo be angry about that. Not just sad, angry. Not performative macho anger, but that tight, quiet anger that comes from being treated like you're lucky to be tolerated. And the actor sells it with restraint, which is the hardest way to sell anger. It's the jaw clench, the stiff shoulders, the way he stops smiling at the wrong moment. You feel the storm in him. And because the performance isn't screaming, you respect it more. Now, for Geeta, the story starts pushing on her own soft spots in a way that I think is really smart. It doesn't just test her love for Leo. It tests her identity. Because she's used to being the person with solutions. The person who can cut through nonsense. The person who can make a call and move the world. And relationships have this nasty habit of humbling you. Not by making you weaker, but by introducing problems you can't fix with authority. Like insecurity. Like old wounds. Like the difference between being obeyed and being understood. The show keeps placing her in situations where her power is useless. And you see this flicker of frustration that reads like fear. And wait, this matters later in a way that's kind of beautiful. You start to notice that the more Geeta genuinely cares, the less she can hide behind competence. If she doesn't care, she can be cool and decisive. If she cares, she becomes reactive. She becomes human. And the drama uses that to make her vulnerability feel earned rather than performative. When she loses her composure, it's not for the audience. It's because she's losing control of the one thing she's always relied on. There's a stretch where the show really leans into the idea that intimacy is exposure, not the sexy kind, the scary kind. Leo is exposed in Geeta's world as the poor husband. Geeta is exposed in Leo's emotional world as the woman who doesn't know how to be held. And both of those exposures come with shame. That's the weird part. People talk about vulnerability like it's automatically noble. But vulnerability can be embarrassing. It can feel like you're failing at being a person. The show understands that embarrassment, and it lets it sit in the frame. One of the more quietly devastating things the drama does is show you how Leo's self-esteem is shaped by labor. He knows how to be valuable when he's working himself to the bone. He doesn't know how to be valuable when he's resting. So when Geeta offers him comfort, it's not a simple gift. It's a challenge. It's like she's handing him a language he doesn't speak yet. And you can see him trying to translate himself into someone who deserves softness. It's awkward. It's slow. It's beautiful. If you've ever been the person who doesn't know how to accept help without feeling like you or your soul, this show will get under your skin. I didn't expect it to. And that's what makes it hit. Because you go in for the trope, and then suddenly you're watching a character negotiate the same internal rules you've been quietly living under. And you're like, oh, we're doing this. We're doing the real stuff. The show also plays with the social narrative around gold digging, but it flips it in a way that feels pointed. Leo isn't chasing Geeta's money. If anything, he's actively uncomfortable with it. But the world doesn't care about his intentions. The world loves a simple story. And the show uses that to explore how reputation is a kind of violence. People can accuse you of motives you don't have. And the accusation becomes a reality you have to defend against. That defense itself becomes exhausting. And exhaustion leads to mistakes. And mistakes become proof. The show captures that spiral. There are scenes where you can feel Leo deciding whether to swallow his pride or speak up. And neither option feels good. Swallowing feels like agreeing with the disrespect. Speaking up feels like confirming the stereotype that he's difficult. That's a classic trap for anyone who's moved between classes, or anyone who's been the outsider in a room full of insiders. You learn quickly that the room has rules, and the rules were not made with you in mind. And here's a question the drama keeps whispering without ever fully answering, and it's one that kept me watching even when I was tired. Is love enough to bridge a power gap? Or does love just make the power gap more painful because now it's personal? Because you can survive injustice from strangers. It's harder to survive feeling misunderstood by the person who says they love you. The mid-story conflicts, for me, land best when they're rooted in that power gap rather than in random external chaos. Like, yes, external chaos is part of melodrama. We are not pretending this is a minimalist indie film. But the show is strongest when it uses external events to reveal internal fractures. When something happens that forces Leo to confront how little control he has in Geeta's world, or forces Geeta to confront how little she understands about Leo's pride, that's when it sings. They're a kind of confrontation scene, one of those key relationship fights, not a screaming match, but a real clash, where you can feel both of them speaking from pain rather than from logic. Leo isn't just saying, "Don't do that." He's saying, "Don't make me feel small." And Geeta isn't just saying, "I'm trying to help." She's saying, "I don't know how to love without acting." And when a drama lets its characters fight about what they actually mean instead of what the plot needs, I'm in. I'm fully in. Acting-wise, this is where I think both leads really start earning their screen time. It's easy to play the early fantasy beats. Shock, attraction, defiance. It's harder to play the long-term intimacy beats. Disappointment, compromise, quiet resentment that you don't want to admit is building. Leo's actor uses his eyes like a diary. You can tell when he's decided something but hasn't said it yet. Geeta's actor uses stillness as power and then uses sudden motion as vulnerability. When she's threatened emotionally, she moves faster. She talks faster. She reaches for action. It's a consistent behavioral pattern that makes her feel like a real person, not a trope. The cinematography also grows with them. As the relationship stabilizes in some areas and destabilizes in others, the camera starts to play more with distance. Sometimes it keeps them in the same frame but far apart, emphasizing the emotional gulf. Sometimes it pushes in uncomfortably close, like the show is forcing you to watch them feel things they'd rather not feel. And the editing is paced to their emotions, not to the plot. Scenes breathe longer when someone is trying not to cry. Cuts are sharper when someone is trying not to explode. There's this recurring use of reflective surfaces, glass walls, mirrors, glossy floors that makes everything feel watched, doubled, performative. Again, I'm not claiming some specific director's manifesto, but the visual motive is there. It's especially effective in Geeta's world, where privacy is a luxury even she doesn't fully have. When Leo is framed through glass, it often feels like he's behind a barrier, like he's being displayed. When Geeta is framed in a mirror, it often feels like she's watching herself, policing herself. Those are small visual choices that quietly reinforce the theme, identity under surveillance. And okay, can I be a little messy for a second? There's a point watching this where I caught myself thinking, "Leo, please, just let her help you." And then I immediately felt gross about it. Because that's exactly what people say to someone who's being stripped of agency with a smile. Help is not always help. Help can be controlled with better branding. The drama made me check my own instincts. That's what good melodrama can do when it's not lazy. It can lure you into the emotional convenience of the trope, then make you realize the trope has teeth. The show also complicates the idea of revenge in a way I didn't expect. Because the most obvious revenge story here is Leo becoming rich and humiliating the person who betrayed him. And yes, the setup practically begs for that. But the deeper, more interesting revenge is Leo becoming unhumiliatable. Not because he becomes arrogant, but because his self-worth stops depending on other people's approval. And the drama keeps teasing that as the true endgame, even if it still delivers some genre-satisfying karma moments along the way. A surprising take I've seen floating around in conversations is that the drama should have made Leo more ruthless once he enters Geeta's world. Like, he should have started playing the game back, manipulating people, pulling strings. And I get the appetite for that. It would be delicious. But I'm glad the show doesn't fully go that route because it would betray Leo's core. His strength is not cunning. His strength is integrity under pressure. And that's harder to write, honestly, because integrity can look passive if you don't dramatize it well. This show actually dramatizes it. It shows integrity as an active choice that costs something. That's rare. There's also the way the show treats Leo's background as something more than a pity story. It's a value system. Leo's labor taught him certain truths. You don't waste. You don't promise what you can't deliver. You don't look down on someone doing necessary work. Those truths clash with the corporate world's flexibility, with language and loyalty. And watching Leo bring his values into a space that doesn't respect them is satisfying in the way watching someone bring a candle into a cold room can be satisfying. It's small, but it changes the air. Another rehook, because this is the hinge point where I think the series starts to get addictive in a deeper way. When Leo finally gets the chance to define himself, does he choose to become a new person, or does he insist on being the same person with a new context? And for Geeta, does she fall in love with Leo's essence or with what he represents to her rebellion? Because those are not the same love. The drama keeps building tension around representation. Leo represents authenticity to Geeta's world. Geeta represents opportunity to Leo's world. But representation is dangerous. When you love someone for what they symbolize, you're always at risk of being disappointed by their humanity. Leo is not pure authenticity all the time. Sometimes he's petty, sometimes he's stubborn, sometimes he's insecure. Geeta is not pure opportunity. Sometimes she's controlling, sometimes she's distant, sometimes she's reckless with other people's emotions. The show's emotional growth comes from them letting each other be human without withdrawing love. There's a late middle stretch where the show's atmosphere gets heavier. The lighting feels a bit cooler, the music leans more minor key, and the world feels less like a fairy tale and more like a social experiment. You can feel the honeymoon phase ending. And I love that the show doesn't pretend the honeymoon phase is just romance. The honeymoon phase is also denial. It's the phase where you choose not to see the cracks because the high feels too good. When that denial breaks, everything gets raw. In that rawness, the show gives you some of its best scenes. The ones where characters aren't arguing about a single event, they're arguing about meaning. About what the marriage means to them, what they fear it means to others, what it might become. Those are the scenes where you realize the show is less about plot and more about identity negotiation. Who am I now? Who are you to me? Who are we when the world keeps narrating us? One of the craft choices that really supports this is the way the show handles public spaces versus private spaces. Public spaces are often shot with wider frames, more people in the background, more noise, more movement. Private spaces are shot tighter, with softer sound, with the score sometimes barely there. But what's interesting is that as the relationship gets more complicated, even private spaces start to feel public. You'll get a scene where they're alone, but the camera placement makes it feel like the room itself is listening, like the walls have ears. It creates this sense that they can't fully escape the world's gaze, even at home. And that leads into one of the show's more painful truths. When you're in a high-profile relationship, privacy is not guaranteed. But even beyond high-profile, when there are class difference, your relationship becomes a social story. People project onto it. People judge it. People feel entitled to comment. The show depicts that entitlement as almost mundane, which is what makes it scary. It's not one villain. It's everyone. Now, let's talk about the X again, without getting too specific. The X's presence in the story isn't just there to be hated. It's there to represent a certain kind of social ambition. The kind that treats people as stepping stones. And here's where I'm going to be gently contrarian again. I don't think the X is the most interesting villain. I think the more interesting villain is the system that taught her to value status over loyalty in the first place. That doesn't excuse betrayal, but it does make the story richer. Because if you reduce her to a cartoon, you reduce Leo's pain to a cartoon too. The show, at its best, doesn't do that. It lets the betrayal be cruel, and still lets you sense the social pressures that make cruelty seem rational to some people. When the drama leans into that complexity, it becomes less about bad person gets punished, and more about a society that rewards the wrong instincts. And that's the kind of theme that sticks with you. It makes you look at the side characters differently. It makes you notice how everyone is bargaining for security in their own way. Leo bargained with labor. The ex bargained with social climbing. Geeta bargained with control. Everyone is just trying not to be powerless. The tragedy is how many people accept cruelty as the price of not being powerless. There's also this subtle tension between romantic love and self-respect that the show keeps foregrounding. Romantic love wants closeness. Self-respect wants boundaries. And sometimes those two things fight. There are moments where Leo could keep peace by staying quiet, but staying quiet would cost him self-respect. There are moments where Geeta could keep control by making a unilateral decision, but making that decision would cost her intimacy. The show understands that love is not just feelings. Love is a sequence of choices that either reinforce or erode respect. And again, because this is melodrama, those choices aren't always made calmly. They're made in the heat of stress. They're made when someone's tired, when someone's embarrassed, when someone's triggered. The show doesn't sanitize that. Sometimes the characters say the wrong thing. Sometimes they apologize poorly. Sometimes the apology isn't even for what you wish it would be. And I appreciate that, because perfect communication is not a realistic romance fantasy. It's a different genre. A big reason this works, for me, is that the show never fully turns either lead into a moral lesson. Leo is good, but not angelic. Geeta is powerful, but not infallible. Their flaws aren't there to create cheap drama. They're there to create friction that feels like growth is possible. And growth is what makes a long-form drama satisfying. If characters don't change, you're just watching repeated loops. Here, the loops gradually widen. The same conflict shows up, but the characters approach it differently. That's progress. There's a sequence feel, later on, where Leo begins to find his footing in Geeta's world. Not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more himself. You see him start to speak with more confidence. You see him start to take up space. Not in a domineering way, in a grounded way. And what's satisfying is that the show doesn't frame that as him becoming better because he's richer. It frames it as him becoming better because he's no longer ashamed. That's a crucial difference. Shame is the real poverty in this story. And you can watch Geeta respond to that. At first, his confidence might challenge her. Not because she doesn't want him confident, but because she's used to being the one who sets the tone. When he starts setting his own tone, she has to adjust. She has to share power emotionally. And that's hard for someone who has been rewarded her whole life for being in control. The drama makes that adjustment feel like a fight she's having with herself. Here's a moment I loved, not because it's flashy, but because it's emotionally specific. There are a kind of scene where Geeta is about to step in and fix something, and Leo stops her with a look or with a quiet line, and you can see her swallow her impulse. You can see her choose him over her habits. And that's romance. That's not flowers and fireworks. That's someone unlearning control because they care more about your dignity than about being right. The show also has a knack for making emotional revelations happen in mundane settings. Not always in dramatic rainstorms. Sometimes in hallways. Sometimes in cars. Sometimes in the quiet after a social event when both of them are exhausted from performing. Those are the moments where people tell the truth because they're too tired to lie well. The drama uses that exhaustion beautifully. It makes you feel like the characters are real adults living real lives, even inside a heightened premise. Now, if I'm talking about craft honestly, the series does occasionally lean on some melodrama shortcuts. You'll get moments where the timing of an interruption feels a little too convenient. You'll get moments where a character arrives at just the right second. That's genre. I'm not going to act like it's not, but because the emotional core is strong, I forgave those shortcuts. The show earns enough goodwill that when it asks you to accept a coincidence, you shrug and go, fine, but make me feel something. And it usually does. The score, in particular, grows on you. It starts to feel like part of the relationship. Not in a corny, this is their theme way, but in this is the emotional weather way. When things are uncertain, the music often stays minimal, like a held breath. When things swell, it's usually tied to a character making a choice rather than just a romantic moment happening. It's a subtle distinction, but it changes how manipulated you feel. It makes the emotion feel like it's coming from the characters, not from the soundtrack telling you what to feel. And okay, I have to talk about one vivid mini-scene retelling that, for me, is the drama in a nutshell. Imagine a formal social setting, the kind of place where everyone's voice is slightly too polite and everyone's laugh is slightly too measured. The lighting is clean, almost clinical, because it's designed to flatter wealth. Leo is there, in a suit that fits but still feels like costume on his shoulders. Geeta is there, composed as ever, her posture a statement. Someone says something about Leo that's framed as a joke, but you can hear the contempt under it. The room reacts with that polite laughter that's basically consent. Leo's face goes still, and you can tell he's deciding whether to accept humiliation again, because that's what he's trained to do. Then, instead of Geeta cutting in with CEO authority, Leo speaks. Calm. Simple. Not a speech. Just a boundary. The room goes quiet in that way rooms go quiet when someone breaks the rules. And you can see Geeta's eyes flicker, not with anger, but with something like respect. Like she realizes he doesn't need her to rescue him in that moment. He just needs her to stand with him. And the camera holds on them just long enough for you to feel the shift. To people against a room. That scene works because it's not revenge. It's dignity. And dignity is the real fantasy here. Not wealth. Not power. Dignity. Another rehook. Because this is the point where the show's central romance either becomes a partnership or becomes a cage. When Leo starts standing up for himself, does Geeta celebrate it or does she feel threatened by it? And when Geeta starts letting go of control, does Leo trust it or does he suspect it's another test? Because trust is not built on love declarations. It's built on consistent behavior over time. The show keeps showing you behavior. That's what I appreciate. It doesn't rely solely on dialogue to tell you what's changing. It shows you Leo walking into rooms differently. It shows you Geeta listening longer. It shows you both of them choosing not to escalate in moments where earlier they would have. Those are incremental changes. But in long-form storytelling, incremental changes are everything. That's how you believe in the arc. There's also a theme here about being kept versus being supported. Leo doesn't want to be kept. He doesn't want to be a pet. He wants to be supported in building his own path. The drama plays with that distinction repeatedly. Sometimes Geeta, in her eagerness to protect, crosses into keeping. Sometimes Leo, in his eagerness to prove himself, rejects support that would actually help him grow. They're both learning the difference, and they both mess it up at different times. This is where the show's writing becomes almost like a dance of pride. Pride isn't treated as a villain. It's treated as a protective instinct. Leo's pride protected him from being crushed by life. Geeta's pride protected her from being eaten alive by her world. But pride, when you bring it into intimacy, can become a wall. And the show keeps asking, which walls are necessary and which walls are just fear wearing armor? I also want to touch on how the drama portrays the idea of deserving. Leo's arc is haunted by the idea that he has to deserve love. Geeta's arc is haunted by the idea that she has to deserve respect. Those are different demons, but they rhyme, and that's why they connect. They both understand, in different contexts, what it feels like to be constantly evaluated. Leo is evaluated as good enough socially. Geeta is evaluated as acceptable emotionally, as if a powerful woman has to justify every expression of feeling. The show uses that shared evaluation pressure as a bridge between them. When the writing is at its best, it finds ways to make them mirror each other without making them identical. Leo is still Leo. Geeta is still Geeta. But their wounds speak to each other. That's where chemistry comes from. Chemistry isn't just attraction. It's recognition. It's seeing something in someone that you didn't have language for in yourself. Now, I'm going to be honest about one thing that might bug some viewers. The show can be indulgent with its pain. It likes to keep the pressure on. It likes to test the relationship in ways that sometimes feel relentless. If you're someone who wants your romance dramas to be mostly comfort with occasional conflict, this might feel like too much. But if you like romances that treat love as something you have to fight for against both the world and your own bad habits, then the intensity is part of the appeal. And there is a subtle difference between relentless because the writers can't think of anything else, and relentless because the theme is survival. This show leans toward the latter. Leo has always lived a relentless life. Geeta has always lived a relentless life, just in a different costume. So it makes sense that their love story isn't gentle by default. Gentleness is something they have to learn. The drama also does something interesting with the concept of marrying up. Leo's new status brings him a kind of social respect, but it also brings him a new vulnerability. He can be dismissed as someone who doesn't belong. The show depicts that dismissal in small, cruel ways. People making assumptions. People excluding him subtly. People praising him in a way that's actually an insult. "You're so lucky," said with a smile that implies, "You didn't earn this." And you can see Leo's internal fight every time. Do I correct them? Do I ignore them? Do I let it poison me? Geeta, for her part, has to face the fact that some people will never respect her relationship, not because of Leo, but because of her. Because a woman CEO choosing a working class man is read as scandal, or as weakness, or as some kind of midlife crisis, depending on who's judging. The show captures that sexist undertone without turning it into a lecture. It just shows you how people react. The side glances, the comments framed as concern, the way her professional decisions suddenly get interpreted through her personal life. That's real. And the show, to its credit, doesn't let Geeta respond by shrinking. She doesn't become apologetic for loving someone. She doesn't start acting like she needs permission. Her defiance is part of why she's compelling. But defiance can also become stubbornness. Sometimes she stays firm not because it's the right move, but because she refuses to be challenged. When he calls her out gently, it lands harder than when someone else confronts her aggressively. Because he's not challenging her power, he's challenging her performance. And performances are where her safety lies. Let's talk about the show's humor again, because it's such an underrated part of why it works. There are moments where the character's pride makes them ridiculous, and the show lets them be ridiculous without mocking them. Like two people who care about each other, trying to be casual and failing miserably. Or someone trying to say something tender and then immediately covering it with a business-like tone. Those little comedic beats make the relationship feel alive. They also make the heavier moments hit harder, because the show isn't emotionally monotone. It has range. And yeah, sometimes I laughed at Leo's reactions to wealth stuff, not because he's poor, but because the show captures that what am I supposed to do with this feeling in a relatable way. Like, you don't have to be working class to relate to being out of your depth. We've all walked into a room and felt like our voice didn't belong there. The show turns that universal feeling into a specific story. Now, one area where I think the drama deserves more credit than it might get is its refusal to romanticize poverty. It doesn't make Leo's old life noble suffering that should be preserved. It shows it as hard, exhausting, unfair. It honors the dignity of labor without pretending the labor is spiritually purifying. That's important, because there's a nasty narrative sometimes that struggle is what makes you good. Struggle can also just break you. Leo's goodness exists despite struggle, not because of it. And the show similarly refuses to demonize wealth as inherently evil. Geeta's wealth is not the villain. The villain is how wealth can distort relationships when it becomes the language everything is spoken in. The show treats wealth as a tool and a barrier. It gives comfort and creates suspicion. It opens doors and creates cages. That nuance is why the show feels more adult than its title might suggest. The supporting characters, without me getting into specifics, are used in a way that feels like social pressure rather than like side plot clutter. You'll have people who genuinely care but still say the wrong thing because they're conditioned by class assumptions. You'll have people who are openly opportunistic. You'll have people who see Leo and project their own insecurities onto him. The show uses these interactions to keep reminding you no relationship exists in isolation, especially not one like this. There's also a subtle motive of education as both a privilege and a weapon. Leo funded someone else's education, and that education became a ladder she climbed away from him with. That's the cruel irony at the heart of the betrayal. Education is supposed to empower. Here, it's shown as something that can be used to justify contempt. The show doesn't say education is bad. It says education doesn't automatically make you good. And that's true. The writing sometimes gives Leo a kind of moral clarity that borders on idealized. But because the performance keeps it grounded, it doesn't feel preachy. He's not always delivering moral lessons. He's often just reacting honestly to hypocrisy. And honestly, sometimes it's refreshing to watch a character refuse to play along with toxic social scripts. It gives you that catharsis of, yes, someone finally said it, without turning into a soapbox. Geeta's moral journey is trickier. She's used to a world where moral clarity is expensive, where you have to compromise to survive. The drama doesn't simplify that. It lets her be pragmatic. It lets her make choices that are emotionally questionable but strategically understandable. And then it makes her live with the emotional consequences. That's good writing. Not punishment, consequence. Another rehook, because this is where the drama's themes start to converge into something bigger than romance. What if the story isn't actually about Leo becoming rich? What if it's about both of them becoming free? Leo becoming free from shame and Geeta becoming free from performance. And if that's the story, then the question becomes, can they get free together? Or does freedom require walking away from each other at some point? That tension is what makes the later stretch so watchable. The show keeps threading the idea that love can be both anchor and sail. Geeta anchors Leo in a sense of being chosen. Leo anchors Geeta in a sense of being real. But anchoring can become weight. If Leo becomes dependent on Geeta for validation, he'll never be free. If Geeta becomes dependent on Leo for authenticity, she'll never be free. The drama is constantly teasing that risk. It's a relationship that could heal them or trap them, depending on whether they can love without using. And yes, I'm aware that sounds like a lot of psychological language for a melodrama. But the reason I'm talking this way is because the show invites it. It's not just scenes of people yelling and crying. It's scenes of people trying to undo their conditioning. That's inherently psychological. It's inherently about patterns. There's a scene type that repeats in different forms. Someone offers Leo something he would have begged for in his old life, and now he has to decide whether to accept it as a gift or reject it as a threat to his pride. Those decisions shape him. They're not just plot beats, they're identity beats. And you can watch him slowly recalibrate what acceptance means. Acceptance doesn't have to mean debt. Acceptance can mean trust. But trust is scary when you've been betrayed. Geeta has her own version. Someone challenges her authority or questions her choice, and she has to decide whether to crush them with power or respond with vulnerability. Crushing is easier. Vulnerability is riskier. The show shows you how often she chooses crushing by habit, then slowly learns vulnerability is not weakness. That arc is satisfying because it's not a makeover. It's a rewiring. Visually, there's a way the show uses doorways and thresholds that keeps showing up. Leo is often framed at the edge of rooms, like he's not sure he's allowed fully inside. Geeta is often framed in the center, but sometimes behind a desk or a barrier, like even when she's central she's protected. As their relationship evolves, you see Leo step further in. The drama plays with that line. It lets her be noble and flawed in the same breath. The camera loves her when she's in control. You can feel it. The shots are clean. The angels make her look tall even when she's sitting. And then when she's vulnerable, the camera stops flattering her. It gets closer, less polished. It shows you the tiredness under her eyes, the tension around her mouth. That shift makes her vulnerability feel more intimate. It's like the show is letting you see behind the brand. And speaking of brands, there's an interesting subtext about how both characters have been branded by society. Leo is branded as worker, provider, supporter. Geeta is branded as boss, cold, unreachable. Their marriage disrupts those brands. Leo is suddenly branded as kept man by people who want to diminish him. Geeta is branded as impulsive by people who want to diminish her. And the show is basically asking, who are you when you refuse the brand they put on you? There's a point where Leo's growth starts to look less like adaptation and more like evolution. He stops trying to fit into Geeta's world on their terms. He starts asking, what would it look like for me to exist here on my terms? That's a huge shift. And it's scary, because when you start defining yourself, you risk losing the people who preferred you predictable. Geeta has a parallel shift. She stops treating the marriage as something she can manage. She starts treating it as something she has to participate in. Not command, participate. That's the emotional journey in one word, participation. She can't just decide it's going to work. She has to actually show up for the messy parts. The show uses conflicts to push them toward participation. And I like that it doesn't always make the conflicts external villains. Sometimes the conflict is just misunderstanding shaped by different life experiences. Like Leo hearing something through the lens of scarcity and assuming the worst. Geeta hearing something through the lens of power and assuming she can fix it. Their lenses distort reality. Love is them gradually adjusting the lenses. Now, I want to talk about something that's easy to miss if you're binging, the show's relationship with time. It doesn't feel like everything happens in a single day, even when the plot moves fast. It gives you a sense of routine. Meetings, meals, commuting, social obligations. That routine is important because it's where trust is actually built. Trust isn't built in climactic moments. It's built in the everyday. And the show makes space for the everyday. There's also a physicality to Leo that remains consistent. Even in suits, he moves like someone who has done hard work. His shoulders carry weight differently. His hands have a certain readiness. And the drama doesn't erase that. It doesn't try to make him look like a polished executive overnight. That's respectful. It honors his history. And it keeps his transformation from feeling like a lie. Geeta's physicality, on the other hand, is all control until it isn't. She's precise. She's contained. And when her containment breaks, it's not loud, it's sudden. A breath catches. A hand trembles. A voice cracks for a split second, and then she tries to smooth it over. Those are the moments where the actor is really doing the work. And the camera is kind enough to stay with her rather than cutting away. Another rehook, because this is where a lot of viewers start forming their loyalty to one character over the other. When the relationship hits its roughest patch, who do you side with? Do you side with Leo's need for autonomy, even if it sometimes comes out as stubbornness? Or do you side with Geeta's need for control, even if it sometimes comes out as overreach? And more importantly, can the show make you understand both at once without turning it into a scoreboard? That's the challenge of writing a romance with a power imbalance. If you're not careful, the show turns into one person is right, one person is wrong. This drama, most of the time, doesn't do that. It makes the fights feel like two people defending their survival strategies. Survival strategies are not moral failings. They're just learned behaviors. And unlearning them hurts. There's an emotional confession I'll make here, because it's part of why I love this drama. Watching Leo learn to speak up without apologizing hit me harder than I expected, because I've been the person who apologizes for having needs. Not even big needs, just basic human needs, like wanting clarity, wanting respect, wanting to not be treated like an inconvenience. Seeing a character slowly stop asking permission to exist it's healing. It's cheesy to say, but it's true. And it made me realize how rarely we get that arc for a male lead in this genre without turning him into a jerk. Leo's arc is not about becoming dominant. It's about becoming whole. The show also understands that healing isn't linear. Leo will have a breakthrough and then regress. Geeta will have a vulnerable moment and then retreat into control. That back and forth could feel repetitive if it weren't grounded in performance. But because the actors make each repetition slightly different, you don't feel like you're watching the same scene. You feel like you're watching a spiral. Same place, new level. There's also this recurring tension about public displays. When Geeta does something publicly to affirm Leo, it can feel empowering and humiliating at the same time. Empowering because she's claiming him. Humiliating because she's claiming him in a way that signals he needs to be claimed. Leo's discomfort with that is so understandable. The show doesn't always articulate it in dialogue, but it's in his body. It's in the way he stiffens when attention turns to him, the way he avoids eye contact with the crowd, the way he becomes hyper-aware of being watched. Geeta, on the other hand, is comfortable with being watched. She has been watched her whole life. But comfort with being watched doesn't mean comfort with being known. And that's where Leo becomes dangerous to her. Because Leo doesn't just watch her brand. He watches her. He notices when her smile is fake. He notices when her anger is covering hurt. He notices when her "I'm fine" is actually "I'm terrified." And that kind of being seen is more threatening than any corporate rival. The drama uses that. It uses Leo's perception as a kind of intimacy weapon. You see Geeta step out from behind barriers. It's subtle, but it's consistent enough that your brain registers it even if you don't consciously name it. The show's production design also deserves a nod. Geeta's spaces don't just look expensive, they look curated. Like someone made decisions about what is allowed to be visible. That's character. Leo's spaces look lived in. Even when he's in new environments, he brings lived-in energy with him. That contrast makes their shared spaces feel like negotiation zones. What do they keep? What do they hide? What do they allow to exist? There's also a theme of public romance versus private romance. Public romance is gestures, statements, defenses, optics. Private romance is patience, listening, letting someone be ugly without leaving. The show gives you both, but it's more interested in private romance. And that's why it ends up feeling more sincere than a lot of dramas with similar tropes. Now, I'm going to talk about something that might be controversial. I actually think the show is at its most romantic when it's least overtly romantic. The big gestures are fun, sure. But the moments that made me believe in them were the moments where one of them changed behavior, where Geeta stopped interrupting, where Leo stopped apologizing for taking up space, where one of them stayed in the room during a difficult conversation instead of walking away. That's love. That's the unsexy work. And because the show is a 2026 release, you can feel some modern sensibilities in how it treats emotional boundaries compared to older melodrama styles. It still loves its heightened moments, but it also seems aware that audiences now are more attuned to power dynamics. The drama doesn't always get it perfect, but it's trying. It's trying to make the romance intense without making it feel like one person is being swallowed. There's a latent tension, without me spoiling specifics, where the question of "why did you marry me" becomes more than a romantic curiosity. It becomes a test. Was it pity? Was it rebellion? Was it love? Was it strategy? And the show understands that the answer might be multiple things at once. Humans don't do single motive decisions, especially not under stress. Geeta's decision can be both desire and defiance. Leo's acceptance can be both escape and hope. The drama is honest about that complexity, and that honesty is what keeps it from feeling like a pure fairy tale. Another rehook, because this is where the show starts pressing on your heart in a different way. What happens when the initial narrative of "she chose him" fades, and you realize the relationship has to become they choose each other every day. That shift from one-time rescue to daily choice is where a lot of romances either mature or collapse. The show pushes them into daily choice. It forces them to confront routines. Who compromises? Who apologizes first? Who initiates repair? Repair is one of the most important relationship skills, and dramas rarely focus on it because it's not as flashy as conflict. This drama gives you repair. Sometimes messy repair. Sometimes incomplete repair. But repair. You'll get scenes where they talk, and it doesn't fix everything, but it opens a door. You'll get scenes where one of them tries to make amends and the other isn't ready to receive it yet. That's realistic. Sometimes apology is not enough. Sometimes you need changed behavior over time. The show understands that. It uses time as proof. It doesn't resolve everything with one tearful hug. And okay, the show still knows how to serve. It knows how to deliver those moments where the room shifts, where someone's face falls, where the music drops out and you realize something has changed. It knows how to build tension in a conversation. It knows how to end a scene on a look that makes you hit next episode. The craft is there. The pacing may slow in places, but the hook is maintained through emotional suspense rather than plot gimmicks. There's a recurring motif of hands. Not in a cheesy symbolic way, but in a grounded way. Leo's hands are hands that have worked. Geeta's hands are hands that sign deals, that gesture commands, that rarely tremble. When the show focuses on their hands, hands reaching, hands withdrawing, hands hovering without touching, it's telling you about trust. Touch is permission. Touch is vulnerability. When they touch, it means something. And when they don't, it also means something. The show's lighting also does this thing where warmth is not automatically tied to wealth. Warmth is tied to emotional safety. You can have a cold-looking luxury room that feels warm when the characters are connected. You can have a warm-toned space that feels cold when they're disconnected. That's smart. It makes the environment responsive to emotion rather than just a status. Now, let me address the elephant in the room for newcomers. Yes, the premise is sensational. Yes, the marriage is impulsive. Yes, some things happen because drama. But the reason I'm still sitting here talking like I've been emotionally compromised is because the show's emotional logic is consistent. Even when the plot is heightened, the feelings make sense. That's the difference between melodrama that feels cheap and melodrama that feels satisfying. If you believe the feelings, you'll forgive a lot. Another place the show does well is in making you feel the cost of social climbing even when it's accidental. Leo didn't climb socially by ambition, he climbed by circumstance. But the cost still applies. The cost is losing the simplicity of being unknown. The cost is being watched. The cost is people treating your relationship like a storyline. The cost is wondering who is genuine. And the show doesn't treat that cost as a footnote. It makes it part of the emotional atmosphere. There are also moments of quiet solidarity between Leo and Geeta that made me smile in this tired, soft way. Not giddy romance smiles. More like, oh, they're becoming a team. Those moments often happen when they're facing external judgment together. When they exchange a look that says, we see what they're doing. When they stand close not for show, but for support. That's partnership. That's what you want for them. And then, because the show loves tension, it will disrupt that partnership. It will put them in situations where external pressure tempts them to betray each other emotionally. Not in a cheating sense necessarily, but in a do you prioritize your image or your partner sense. Geeta has to choose between maintaining authority and protecting Leo's dignity. Leo has to choose between proving independence and accepting support. Those choices are not easy. The show treats them as real dilemmas, not as obvious moral tests. There are moments where Leo's sense of pride collides with the reality that some battles can't be won with pride alone. Sometimes you need strategy. Sometimes you need resources. And that's where Geeta's world has value. The show explores whether Leo can learn to use power without becoming corrupted by it. That's a fascinating question. It's the question of whether you can enter a system without being swallowed by it. Geeta, similarly, has to learn whether she can use her power in service of love without making love subordinate to power. That's the mirror question. Can she protect without controlling? Can she provide without owning? The show doesn't give you easy answers. It shows you attempts. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. Another rehook, because if you're still with me, this is the emotional crux. Can a relationship born from impulse become a relationship sustained by intention? Because impulse is chemistry, intention is commitment, and commitment is not a mood. The show is deeply interested in intention. It's interested in the choice to stay. It's interested in the choice to apologize. It's interested in the choice to change. And that's why it ends up feeling, weirdly, more mature than some romances that are technically healthier on paper. This drama understands that health is built, not declared. Now, let's talk about the editing a bit more, because the series has a particular rhythm in how it delivers emotional punches. It often lets you sit in discomfort longer than you expect. It doesn't always cut away to relieve you. It will hold a shot on someone's face while they process humiliation. That holding is a choice. It makes you share the discomfort rather than just observe it. And I think that's why the betrayal setup is so effective, and why later humiliations, because yes, the world keeps trying to humiliate Leo, hit hard too. The show forces you to feel the time of it, the slow burn of shame, the way it crawls. And then, when it wants to give you catharsis, it cuts faster. It moves with the character's adrenaline. You feel the snap of decision, the enough moment. That contrast between slow discomfort and fast catharsis gives the drama a strong emotional tempo. It keeps you engaged even when the plot is doing familiar melodrama things. Sound design, too, is used to emphasize social pressure. Crowds are loud when Leo feels judged. Rooms are silent when Geeta feels exposed. You'll notice how often the show uses the sound of footsteps in big spaces, the echo of heels or shoes on hard floors to emphasize isolation. Those echoes make characters feel alone even when they're not. It's a simple trick, but it works. The show's approach to romance also avoids one trap that I'm always bracing for, turning the working class character into a fetish of simplicity. You know that trope where the rich character is fascinated by the poor character because they're so simple and pure. That can be condescending. Here, Leo isn't simple. He's complex. He has pride, intelligence, stubbornness, humor. Geeta isn't fascinated by his simplicity. She's fascinated by his solidity. There's a difference. Solid doesn't mean simple. It means grounded. And Leo, importantly, is not fascinated by Geeta just because she's rich. He's fascinated by her intensity, her decisiveness, her contradictions. He's also wary of her. That wariness keeps the romance from becoming worshipped. When the poorer partner worships the richer partner, it becomes uncomfortable. This show keeps them closer to equals emotionally, even when they're not equals socially. There's also an ongoing exploration of what marriage means culturally and socially in their contexts. Marriage isn't just romance. It's family, reputation, expectations, roles. The show uses those expectations to create pressure. People assume Leo should behave a certain way. People assume Geeta should behave a certain way. The marriage becomes a battleground for those assumptions. And the drama doesn't treat those assumptions as neutral. It shows how suffocating they are. A small humorous aside, because I need to breathe. There were times watching the social events where I was like, I would not survive this. The forced smiles, the coded compliments, the feeling that every sentence is a test. I'd last 10 minutes and then I'd spill a drink and accidentally insult someone's grandfather. Leo is honestly doing great considering. And the fact that the show makes those events feel stressful rather than glamorous is why the class theme lands. Now, As the story moves toward its later stretch, the conflicts start to feel less like can they be together and more like what kind of together can they be. That's the evolution you want in a long romance. The question changes. It matures. And the drama seems aware that the biggest obstacle isn't an ex or a rival or gossip. The biggest obstacle is the way both characters were trained to survive. Leo's survival training says, endure, provide, don't complain, don't need. Geeta's survival training says, control, anticipate, don't reveal, don't rely. Those trainings clash. Endurance can look like silence. Control can look like suffocation. The show's later emotional peaks come from moments where one of them chooses to unlearn their training, where Leo chooses to express need, where Geeta chooses to rely. Those are the hardest choices for them. And that's why they're the most romantic. Another rehook, because this is where I think the show's emotional gamble pays off. When Leo finally says what he needs, will Geeta meet that need? Or will she interpret it as criticism and shut down? And when Geeta finally admits fear, will Leo hold her? Or will he feel overwhelmed and retreat? Because vulnerability is not just about revealing, it's about receiving. The drama is good at showing how hard receiving is. Leo struggles to receive care. Geeta struggles to receive comfort. They're both givers in their own way. Leo gives labor, loyalty, support. Geeta gives protection, resources, decisive action. But receiving requires trust. Receiving requires believing you won't be punished for needing. That's the hardest lesson. There's also an interesting subtext about the difference between financial security and emotional security. Geeta can give financial security easily. She can buy comfort. She can remove obstacles. But emotional security is slower. It's built through consistency and respect. The show keeps showing Geeta learning that money can't soothe every fear. Sometimes the only thing that soothes is being present. Leo, similarly, learns that independence doesn't equal emotional safety. He can insist on doing everything alone, but that doesn't protect him from abandonment. It just isolates him. The show doesn't shame him for wanting independence. It shows the cost of making independence into a religion. That's a mature portrayal. There are moments where the drama flirts with making a big external villain the focus. And when it does, it's less interesting to me. I'm not here for mustache twirling. I'm here for the quiet war inside the characters. But I will say the show uses external pressure effectively when it forces the couple to communicate. When it forces them to stop guessing and start asking. Those are the moments where the plot serves the theme. The show's best writing trick is using the same situation to reveal different values. Put Leo in a luxury environment, and it reveals his discomfort with being perceived. Put Geeta in a humble environment, and it reveals her discomfort with being unprotected. Put them together in either environment, and it reveals how they either support or undermine each other. The show uses environment as character testing ground. That's smart. There's a scene vibe where Geeta enters Leo's older world, and you can feel her trying not to look out of place, trying not to offend, trying not to be judged. It's a reversal of Leo's discomfort. And watching her experience that discomfort is important because it creates empathy. It shows her that being out of place is exhausting. It also shows Leo that she's not invincible. She's just powerful in her own territory. And the show uses those reversals to balance the relationship. It prevents the dynamic from becoming one-sided. Leo isn't always the one adapting. Geeta isn't always the one leading. They trade discomfort. They trade vulnerability. That trading is what makes them feel like partners rather than like rescuer and rescued. Another rehook, because this is where the show starts aiming for something bigger than entertainment. What does it mean to be chosen if the choice is public? Leo is chosen publicly by Geeta. But does he feel chosen privately, in the quiet, when there's no audience? And Geeta, who is always judged, does she feel chosen by Leo in a way that isn't about proving something to the world? Because that's the difference between a statement and a relationship. The show keeps returning to private choosing. It gives you scenes where one of them chooses the other in a small way. Choosing to listen, choosing to apologize, choosing to stay. Those choices are what make the relationship feel real. Now, I want to zoom out and talk themes more explicitly because at this point the drama has earned it. Hidup, keras, takdir, berkilau is, on the surface, a fantasy about destiny flipping a life. But under that, it's a story about value. Who gets valued? How value is measured? How value is traded? Leo's value was measured in labor and sacrifice. Geeta's value was measured in competence and control. Both of those measurements are incomplete. The drama is about them discovering a different measurement. Inherent worth. Inherent worth is hard to accept if you've never been treated like you have it. Leo has to learn it. Geeta has to remember it. Because even though she's powerful, she has also been treated as an instrument. A company instrument. A family instrument. A brand instrument. Power doesn't protect you from being objectified. It just changes the language of objectification. That's one of the show's sharper observations, even if it never spells it out in a speech. The title's Sparkling Fate then becomes less about money and more about the possibility of a life where you're not constantly proving you deserve love. That's the sparkle. That's why it's emotionally addictive. It's offering viewers the fantasy of being seen without auditioning. Now, I'm not saying the show is perfect. There are moments where it leans too hard into melodrama intensity and the emotional realism wobbles. There are moments where you can feel the writers pulling the couple apart because the genre demands obstacles. And sometimes I did want to grab the characters and be like, please, just sit down and talk. But then I remember, the inability to talk is part of their trauma. Leo learned that talking doesn't change anything, only working does. Geeta learned that talking can be used against you, only controlling the narrative keeps you safe. Of course, they struggle to communicate. The drama is about them unlearning that. And because it's about unlearning, the show has to show them failing. They have to miscommunicate. They have to hurt each other accidentally. If they were perfect, there would be no arc. The question is whether the failures feel earned. Most of the time, they do. Because they come from consistent character patterns rather than random stupidity. Another rehook. Because this is the point where I think a lot of viewers decide whether they're emotionally all in. Can you handle watching characters you like make mistakes that are believable? Not mistakes that exist to annoy you, but mistakes that exist because healing is messy. If you can handle that, this show rewards you. And it does reward you. It gives you moments of tenderness that feel like oxygen. Moments where the characters finally understand each other in a way that isn't just romantic, but respectful. Moments where Geeta looks at Leo not as someone she saved, but as someone she trusts. Moments where Leo looks at Geeta not as someone who could leave him at any moment, but as someone who's choosing him consistently. Those moments are the payoff. They're not fireworks. They're foundation. There's also a broader social commentary here about how society treats relationships across class lines. The suspicion, the judgment, the entitlement to gossip, the way people assume motive, the way love is treated as transaction. The drama doesn't solve that commentary. It just shows it. And showing it is enough. It makes you uncomfortable in a productive way. It makes you question your own assumptions about why people are together. It also touches, implicitly, on the idea that sometimes the person who betrays you isn't just betraying you. They're betraying the version of you they think you represent. Leo's ex, from what we understand, was chasing a future that didn't include him. That's not just personal betrayal, it's class betrayal. It's the betrayal of shared struggle. The show uses that to explore how upward mobility can create shame about your past, and how that shame can lead people to discard those who remind them of it. That's heavy, but it's real. And the show's response to that isn't to demonize ambition. It's to demonize contempt. Ambition isn't the enemy. Contempt is. The moment you start seeing people as embarrassing, you've lost something human. The drama frames Leo's dignity as the antidote to that contempt. It frames Geeta's willingness to love him openly as a kind of rebellion against contempt. That's why their relationship feels like a statement without feeling like propaganda. Now, I want to talk about the romance fantasy aspect again, because it's part of why people will click this drama in the first place. The fantasy of a CEO woman choosing a hardworking man is delicious. It's also emotionally resonant in a world where so many people feel unseen. But the show doesn't just deliver the fantasy. It asks what the fantasy costs. It shows you the scrutiny. It shows you the adjustment. It shows you the identity crisis. It shows you the fear that you're only loved because you're useful or because you're symbolic. That makes the fantasy feel more honest and, ironically, more satisfying. Another rehook, because this is where the show becomes less about the ex and more about the couple. What happens when the ex fades as a threat and the real threat becomes the couple's own habits? Because that's where most real relationships either mature or die. The show treats habits as villains. Habits of silence. Habits of control. Habits of self-sacrifice. Habits of pride. And because habits are boring on paper, the drama has to make them cinematic. It does that through repetition with variation. The same pattern plays out, but the emotional stakes change. The same silence happens, but the character notices it sooner. The same controlling impulse happens, but the character catches it and stops. That's growth dramatized. There's a particular kind of scene where Geeta is about to do something for Leo without asking. And then she pauses and asks. That pause is everything. It's the difference between love and ownership. And the show makes that pause feel like a leap. Because for Geeta, asking means giving up certainty. It means giving up the illusion of control. It means risking hearing no, and no is something she's not used to receiving in her world. Leo, similarly, has to learn to say yes without feeling like he's surrendering his dignity. That's hard, because when you've been exploited, saying yes can feel like consenting to exploitation. The show shows Leo learning to differentiate, to trust intention, to accept that not everyone is taking from him. That's healing. Now, if you're a newcomer wondering whether this is more romance or more social drama, I'd say it's both, but the romance is the engine. Everything else is there to test the romance. Corporate pressures test it. Social judgment tests it. The ex tests it. Family expectations test it. But the show doesn't let those tests overshadow the core. To people learning how to be equal in a world that insists they're not. And that's where the show's emotional power comes from. It's not just will they end up together. It's what kind of love can they build if they refuse the roles society assigned them. That's a bigger question. That's why you keep watching even when you know the genre beats. Another rehook, because this is the question I kept asking myself late into watching. Does Leo love Geeta as a person or as a doorway out of pain? And does Geeta love Leo as a person or as a way to feel real? Because if either of those loves are primarily about escape, then the relationship is fragile. If they're about recognition, then it has a chance. The show keeps proving recognition through detail. Geeta notices what embarrasses Leo. Leo notices what exhausts Geeta. They start protecting each other in ways that aren't about status, but about sensitivity. That's when you believe in them. When protection looks like, I'm not going to let you be humiliated, not just, I'm going to buy you something. There's also a subtle shift in how the show shoots them together. Early, the camera emphasizes contrast. Rich versus poor, polished versus rough, bright versus warm. Later, the camera emphasizes connection. Shared frames, matched pacing, mirrored gestures. That shift is a visual arc. It's the show telling you the relationship is becoming less about difference and more about partnership. The drama also uses small objects to anchor emotion. Not in a heavy-handed symbolic way, but in a lived-in way. A phone that becomes a source of anxiety. A suit that feels like costume. A simple meal that becomes comfort. These objects are part of the characters' worlds. They carry meaning because the show lets them. That's good storytelling. Now, I'm going to start moving toward my overall verdict, but I'm not going to rush it, because the show doesn't deserve a quick hot take. What I loved most about Hidup keras, takdir berkilau, is that it's a melodrama with a heartbeat. It understands that the tropes exist because they speak to something real. Being betrayed by someone you supported is not just a plot twist. It's a wound people carry in real life. Being chosen after being discarded is not just wish fulfillment. It's a fantasy of restoration. The show delivers that fantasy while still honoring the wound. It doesn't pretend the wound disappears the moment someone wealthy offers you love. And I loved that it made the CEO character feel like a person rather than a trophy. Geeta isn't just powerful, she's pressured. She isn't just decisive, she's terrified of losing control. And watching her learn to love without managing is genuinely satisfying. I loved Leo's arc too, because it doesn't turn him into a Richmond cosplay. It turns him into someone with boundaries. Someone learning that self-worth is not something you earn by suffering. That arc is quietly radical in a genre that often equates pain with romance. I also loved the craft more than I expected. The show's visuals do real work. The sound design supports theme. The editing rhythm matches emotion. The performances carry the microbeats that make long-form romance believable. The chemistry is not just pretty, it's specific. It's built on friction and recognition. My criticisms, because I'm not going to pretend I didn't have any, are mostly about pacing and occasional melodrama convenience. There are stretches where conflict feels stretched, where miscommunication loops could have been tightened. There are moments where external obstacles feel a bit like genre obligation. And if you're someone who needs clean, rational communication in your romance stories, this will frustrate you. But if you understand that these characters are not failing because they're dumb, they're failing because they're wounded, then the frustration becomes part of the experience. You're not just watching romance. You're watching people unlearn survival. If you're new to Indonesian dramas or to this specific trope ecosystem, Hidup keras, takdir berkilau is actually a pretty solid entry point because it gives you the hook and the catharsis. But it also gives you enough nuance to make it feel like more than a sugar rush. If you're a fan of romance that's intense, emotionally messy, and deeply invested in class dynamics without turning into misery porn, you'll probably eat this up. If what you want is a calm, low-conflict love story where everyone communicates perfectly and nothing hurts too much, you might want to skip, or at least brace yourself, because this one likes to press on bruises. And if you're watching purely for revenge and glow-up, you will get satisfaction. But the show's real gift is that it makes the glow-up internal. It makes the win not just about lifestyle, but about dignity. It's about someone who has used learning to stop offering themselves as currency. So yeah, I loved it. Not because it reinvented romance melodrama, but because it understood why we come to romance melodrama in the first place. We come to feel chosen. We come to feel seen. We come to believe that the worst day can still be a turning point. And this drama delivers that belief without insulting your intelligence, which is a harder balance than people give it credit for. If you made it this far with me on Flick Flare, subscribe for more long-form drama reviews like this, because I have a lot of feelings and apparently I'm not done having them on camera. And if you watched Hidup keras, takdir berkilau, I genuinely want to know what you thought about Geeta's choice and Leo's growth. Did the instant marriage feel like romance to you? Or did it feel like something else entirely? Either way, this is one of those shows that leaves a little residue on your heart. The kind you notice later when you're doing something ordinary and you suddenly remember a look, a pause, a boundary being drawn, and you feel that quiet, stubborn spark of hope again.